Hey everybody, just a quick reminder before we get the episode going that your support means a great deal to me. If you are able to support the channel financially, please do go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe and pick one of the packages. For £5, $6.50 a month, you get early access and ad-free access to my content. And for a little bit more than even that, you also get access to AMA and private Q&A sessions that are run directly with my guests through Zoom call at least once a quarter, probably more often than that. I'd appreciate your support. Anyway, let's get on with the episode.
When we pulled the handles, it did not work as advertised. What's supposed to happen is the canopy is supposed to explosively leave. It pulls a lanyard, which then sequences my seat in the back, his seat then a couple, seconds later, a small amount of time later in the front, and we both leave. The canopy did not leave the airplane. It just kind of went clunk and back about 2 or 3 inches. That was probably the time I was the most worried, because if that doesn't go, we don't go. If we don't go, we're done.
Shamu, welcome back to 10% True. It's really good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Shamu, or for the audience at home, Shamu is returning to 10% True, as my introduction just then would indicate. So if you haven't listened to part 1 of this interview, go back and do that. Shamu's an Eagle driver who spent a long time flying the aeroplane, who regaled us with his early year exploits in part 1. We got to, Shamu, the point where you had, I think, just finished up your first assignment as an instructor in the F-15. And the logical place to go next would be Elmendorf, which is where you were assigned to next. But before we do that, let me just say to the audience at home, if you're a subscriber to the channel and you're supporting the channel through a small monetary donation each month, thank you very much. It means a great deal to me. Helps to make sure the channel keeps going and to get these stories out to a wider audience. If you're listening to this and you're experiencing some adverts going through the course of this episode and you want to get rid of those adverts, then come to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe, and for a modest donation each month, you can get access to ad-free versions of all of my interviews with my guests. I would appreciate it. Right. With that said, Shamu, tell us then, you went to Elmendorf, 19th Fighter Squadron.
Sure. I'm going to take one real quick one, and just to kind of put a bow on my time as an instructor. After our talk, I gave it some thought. And one thing that kind of came to mind was we were really, really lucky in that we had a very good corps. I mean, just an amazing corps as I look back at it. I didn't realize it at the time how special it was. But the weapons officers that we had there that worked with us both on the new syllabus, everything that we did down there, were really, really good folks. And I'd like to give them a shout out. I don't have their permission to use their names, so I'm just going to give you a quick alphabetical list of their call signs. Those who were there in that time frame, 91 to 94, will probably recognize it, but they were really pretty amazing group. So in alphabetical order, there was Billy Mack, Bones, Brillo, Bush, Crazy, Nike, and Speed. And they were pretty amazing guys, and none of the little things that I was able to contribute in a minor way would have happened without their advice, their collaboration, and their help. And I just wanted to say publicly thank you to those guys for what they did at that time, both not just for me, but really for the community in that wing. So thank you.
That's really interesting. Shami, let me ask you a little bit more about that then. So did you say they were weapons school cadre?
Yes, we had and I don't know why. I think it may have had to do a little bit with the post-Cold War drawdown, because they were trying to shrink the size of the Air Force in general and the F-15 community in particular. But that was really unusual for one wing. We had three squadrons. So we had the 1st, the 2nd, and the 95th, all F-15 RTU squadrons. But to have that many weapons school instructors on base at one time, I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that was highly unusual. I think what they were trying to do was make sure that these guys had jobs to keep them in the force as a whole while they were, shedding jobs in other places. And that was probably a really brilliant move, because they were really, really talented guys. And us, all the members of the wing, were beneficiaries of having this co-located group of highly talented folks. We were able to do a lot because of the synergy that was developed by having them all there pretty much at the same time.
That's a really interesting point. I didn't just interview Opie Denny, but I interviewed him a couple of months ago. But his episode has just literally gone out tonight on general release to the channel. And one of the things he was talking about was when he was with the 58th Fighter Squadron before they moved him over to Bitburg. He talked about the number of weapons school guys they had in the squadron, and then when they went to Desert Storm, they became the top sort of scoring unit from a mid-kill point of view, and there are some other things that influence that, but he credits the very strong weapons school cadre within that unit as being a driving factor there. And then he talks
that sounds very similar to what I experienced.
Yeah, he said then that there were some other units he went to then where they didn't have any weapons officers, and so what if you would then, those six or so individuals that you just named, specifically, what is it that you got out of having those guys in your unit? I mean, there's the whole weapons school idea of cheating to the point where Blue 4 can execute. Blue 4 is the the least experienced, perhaps, or the least current, perhaps, person in the unit, or in that formation rather. Does having all those weapons school guys in your squadron mean that your Blue 4 standards is just much higher? What does it mean?
Well, I wouldn't say that in our case, because as an RTU, we're dealing with the guys entering, and we're trying to get them up to a certain level and set them forward. What was unique about it was that was the time we were transitioning the syllabus from just kicking out a not even mission ready guy or close to mission ready guy to a new syllabus where we were kicking out a near mission ready guy. So the level of training that we were conducting at Tyndall in that time frame ramped up substantially. The other nice thing about having a large group like we had of the weapons officers were they were from everywhere. We had PACF guys, we had Europe guys, we had Eglin guys, we had Langley guys. So consequently, as we were designing and putting things together, we had really, diverse perspectives from the different units with different missions. What they do in Europe is different than what they do in the Pacific or at Eglin or Langley. So that was neat. And the other just cool thing about it was this group got along real well. I had previous experience where literally we would have a pilot meeting and you'd watch two weapons guys practically go to blows, talking about some sort of inane little tactical, it should go A, it should go B. And that was not the case here. I think in one of your other podcasts, you talked about kind of the progression that it went from this, very high testosterone, my way or the highway, to a more of a teaching and a humility aspect that they've tried to, I think, do. This generation, the ones that I worked with back then, they definitely were that latter category, which made them, in my opinion, I'm no expert here, but very, very productive. And a lot of good things happened because of their willingness to work with everybody on these various things, the simulator, the syllabus, all that kind of stuff. Upgrading from A models to C models and to mess up as well. So that was it was good to have that amount of talent that was willing to work together and not fight over things. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's neat. It brings to mind, I did an interview with a guy called Junior Summingsby, who's a Strike Eagle, was a initial cadre for the Strike Eagle. And he was an instructor, so he taught the guys who were the initial cadre. And he was saying, I think he was a captain at the time. There were like 28 guys, and I think he said something like 24 of them were patch wearers or something, just some insane number. And he said they would sit down and argue about aligning the INS. And so you just walk out, you'd leave them to it. So anyway, that's an aside. Tell us about Alaska then, Shamu. And
sure. So to get to Alaska, I went off to school like the Air Force does when you become a major. Then I went to a staff assignment in NORAD, actually, which will lead to my participation in Noble Eagle a little later in our conversation. But coming out of there, the squadron commander that I had at Tyndall when I was an RTUIP was now a group commander in Alaska. So he kind of by name hired me, which was great. And I was thrilled to go up there, and then went to Alaska. And that was really the best place that I had a chance to fly was definitely Alaska. Not for not like the RTU experience was really good, like professionally and what we did and what we accomplished. But as far as a flying environment and the fun of flying, the challenge of flying, Alaska was top notch. I think the guys that have flown in the Pacific will generally say that about their time in Kadena or wherever, and I understand that, and I didn't get out there, so I can't compare. But Alaska was a very, very cool place to fly. Lots of very big terrain, lots of open airspace, a plentiful number of adversaries because everybody wants to come up and fish for salmon. So it was a neat place to fly, neat place to do things.
Can we talk about the mission as a starting point then? So you have
Sure.
the polar ice cap, of course, to the north of you. It's
Right.
very easy to not appreciate just how close Russia is to Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
It's really
Right.
really nearby, and then the possibility of them coming over the polar ice cap is there. I mean, I have an educated audience; they know what the Eagles are there to do. But
Sure.
can you describe the intercept mission, the protection mission, what it was that you were there to do?
Right. Well, so really, the Eagles in Alaska kind of had a dual mission. One of them was that we did report to NORAD. There's a Alaskan NORAD region that works with the Canadian NORAD region, next door to it, and so we had that mission. That was kind of a little bit of a lower level because at this point now the Cold War had been done for almost a decade, and so things had settled down. Yes, they did some activity from the now Russians of flying their bears, et cetera, near the Alaskan coast, and we would respond to that. But then we also had a wartime mission in support of PACAF, focused much further to the east, primarily, Korea, China, that kind of stuff. So there was both of those things were kind of going on simultaneously. From a training perspective, we focused on the wartime mission in Korea or China. Obviously, that it's a much more complicated mission, and it seemed to us at the time, and I think to our leadership, as the more likely, scenario rather than the Russian bombers. But yes, we did both. During my time frame there, they had already closed down the outlying satellite alert sites at like Galena and King Salmon. They were kind of in what we called a warm storage capacity. We would generate them up probably about once a year for an exercise just to make sure we knew how to turn the lights on. We could get jets in and out. We could refuel them. The maintainers knew where all the tools were, that kind of thing. But that was not a major emphasis. It was just part of being in Alaska that you needed to do that.
What about the aeroplanes you were flying then in particular with the 1905 Squadron? So I was watching a few weeks ago some archive footage of one of the squadrons in Alaska, one of the Eagle squadrons in Alaska flying, and they were carrying CFTs. And I'd always thought that the conformal fuel tanks were only ever carried by the jets at Keflavik. But so this video footage way precedes your time, I know. But were you carrying 3 bags? Did you carry CFTs? What was the configuration of the airplane?
No, we did not do CFTs. If they had AK on the tail and they had CFTs, they were probably E models because we had 2 squadrons. The numbers changed while I was there, but for the majority of my time, it was the 19th and the 12th were the C model squadrons, no CFTs at any point. But there was an E model squadron across the base, and they would have had CFTs permanently. So I don't know what the picture was, but to the best of my knowledge, and the way earlier time, maybe at one time they did. The only place that I knew that C models routinely had CFTs was Iceland at Keflavik. They did have them obviously with an island in the North Sea being so nasty. Having that gas sometimes was very important for them. That's the only C model CFT unit that I am aware of that did it routinely. Alaska may have experimented it, but it did not happen during my time there.
Okay.
Normally, our preferred configuration was not 3 bag. Our preferred configuration was 2 bag. The reason is that you get a very high drag penalty for that centerline tank. And so you really don't gain nearly as much range as you might think you would by adding that tank. And for combat, you'd get rid of them anyways if it was no kidding, but stability issues. There's a lot more that goes into it where the 2 bag configuration, truthfully, is probably my preferred configuration to go into a theater. not always the option. Sometimes you have to have a third bag. If you're deploying, you want the third bag because one of the things you're doing is supplying tanks to where you're going to be because you anticipate you'll lose tanks during a combat situation as people are punching them off, for good reason. So, but in general, the two-bag configuration was a very good one. Plenty of gas. You need a lot of gas in Alaska because things are far away. There are not a lot of divert sites, and the weather can get pretty nasty pretty quick.
Can we talk
Living
a little
in
bit?
England, you probably understand that.
Yeah, especially in the summer. Can we talk a little bit about the mission, the bear inset mission, and then we can talk about the war mission?
Sure.
So, did you do any bear or badger or bison or whatever?
No, there was
intercept, coot intercepts or anything
Yeah,
like that?
no, I did not. We had jets across the ramp on NORAD alert, and they most of the time there it was launching for practice, for the whole system to exercise the whole system. I don't recall. I think there may have been one or two in my 3 years there where guys launched and actually went on bear. I think it actually picked up a lot more later on as things got more contentious in the mid 2000s or late 2000s between Russia and the United States. Then it was not as contentious, so I don't think there was as much provocation. So it stayed ready, but I don't think it was that often that there was an opportunity for that to happen.
Okay. Did you generally within your community, did you look at that mission? Or let me put the question differently. How did you look at that mission from an execution point of view? Did you look at it and think it's something that's complex, technical, lots of opportunity for it to go wrong? Or is it straightforward?
Yeah, you looked at it as pretty benign, pretty straightforward, but also one that you realized, especially once you got to leadership positions. I was kind of a lieutenant colonel in my time in Alaska, that it was definitely a higher visibility. And one you didn't want to mess up. So you definitely paid enough attention on it to make sure it was going to go correctly, but you didn't view it as a complex mission that required a lot of training and a lot of dedicated resources to be ready for it. In truth, my opinion always has been that if you're ready to do the high level combat, this should be a pretty easy thing for you to do. In fact, you just have to learn how to throttle back and kind of slow things down to make sure that you're covering all the required informational bases, because one of the primary reasons that you're up there is really not to shoot missiles right away, because that could have very bad strategic consequences for the globe, but rather that it is to provide as accurate and timely information as you can to the decision makers way above your pay grade and are far away, so that they can have a clear picture of what's going on beyond a blip on a radar. And that's the only, but that's not complex for you as a fighter pilot. It's not complex to fly. Truthfully, probably the most complex things were keeping track of where you were, how much gas you had, where you could go, where you might need to go, because you can get in a world of hurt in Alaska if you're low on fuel and the weather is changing rapidly.
Did you have JTIDS at the time?
Yes, yeah, we had really nice airplanes in the 19th, actually in the wing. So we had, I don't know if it was I'm being technical here, but the JTIDS airplanes were at Mountain Home. There was very few of them. We had what was called FIDL, Fighter Data Link, a JTIDS like, just a smaller box, and maybe cheaper or whatever, but it worked basically the same way and provided the same capability. So yes, we had FDL, Fighter Data Link. We had really good radars. We had really good airplanes, and some of the newer C models, I think, that were around were up in Alaska, and that really came to fruition when they provided the AESA radars to Alaska. We had two, I think they were 21 PAA, if I remember correctly, squadrons. They were a little bit smaller, but the wing was given 18 of the AESA radars, the electronically scanned antennas, kind of the next big great thing. And they were phenomenal. They were eye-watering in their capability. It was really fun to fly them. The Air Force corporate had told the wing to give them to one squadron. I was looking back on it now with some perspective in time, the wing leadership at the time made a really, really intelligent decision and told the Air Force no, from the way that I understand it. I wasn't in on those conversations, but what I was told. And they said, no, we're going to divide them half to each of the squadrons. We're not going to have, the blonde-haired wonderful child and the redheaded stepchild. We're not going down that path. And that was wise. The squadrons got along really, really well, and they really helped each other. I'm sure that the Air Force perspective was keep all the maintenance and everything all under one roof. I understand that. But from an operational perspective, having a whole wing worth of folks that were familiar with it and could use it was wise. And everybody understood that if one squadron got tapped on the shoulder to go to war, all those AESA airplanes would go to them. There was no issue with that. And in fact, you also knew, like others have discussed, that they're probably going to rob your squadron, if you're not the one that's picked, of a lot of your experienced guys. And they wanted them to be available and ready. So on many levels, that was a really good decision. And it made life in the wing really fun back then, too.
You said in the first episode, I referenced the fact you'd sent a little presentation. I said that's always a good indication when somebody sends you slides ahead of time to describe some of the concepts. And you talked in the first episode about some of the limitations of the APG-63, some blind spots, and I loved your characterization of the processor running as fast as it could to keep up, but not eventually being able to, and then you get the blind spots and so on. Yeah. Talk to us then about the opposites then from an AESA point of view. What are the first things that you notice when you use it in the airplane? What are the things that blow your mind about it? There's a few. One, you immediately notice, and Alaska is a great place to see this because there's huge expanses of airspace and there's lots and lots of little airplanes, flying fishermen around and hunters around and getting to the little remote villages and all this stuff. And where in your regular Eagle radar, which is fantastic, but in your regular Eagle radar, you didn't see a lot of those at distance, at very, very far distances. I'm not going to use numbers, but very, very far distances. You get into an AESA radar and suddenly you're looking clear across your fighting airspace to where the other guys are marshaling and getting ready. And down low, you're seeing all these little airplanes and you're going, they're little, they're slow. And the fact that this radar could pick them out that far away was like, wow, this thing is good. Now, you may be wondering how much radiation am I absorbing flying this thing, but hopefully the engineers did that properly. But then the other thing and this is really tactically, this was the key of what really just kind of blew your mind when you went to the AESA. In the Eagle, with the mechanically scanned antenna, you will point it in a certain area of airspace and your wingman is going to do the other up high. So if you're looking high, he's looking low. If you're looking low, he's looking high. And it's based off your position in the foreship or wherever you are. With the AESA, you have the ability to do both simultaneously. And that was like absolutely new to us. And what that meant was you could find somebody down low, tag them. So now you have a weapons quality track. The radar is keeping very accurate information on that guy. And you could roll your radar completely away from him. You couldn't do this before. And you could look up high to see if there's anybody else that you hadn't seen while you're still simultaneously tracking that guy down low, because the electrons are flying around so fast, the radar doesn't care. It'll look wherever you want, and you could keep track not just of one, but you could keep track of multiple. So your ability to build situational awareness with an AESA radar went up exponentially compared to a standard radar. The other thing was your ability to support weapons in flight also went up very, very high for the same reason. You could be shooting people up high, you could be looking down or shooting others down low, and this radar could do pretty much all of that all the time. So that was cool. That was really nice. And we would joke in the wing that the big limitation to an AESA radar equipped jet was the number of missiles. So, which was for training purposes and what we were doing and trying to learn how to best employ it was a ton of fun. That was very cool. Wow. Can you describe a bit more about the the mechanization, for want of a better description, then that you have in the cockpit. So this thing can, shoot the trons out low, high, left and right,
wherever you tell it to.
but you still have to roll it up in inverted commas, because what are you doing?
So here's what they did, and they wisely did. And I don't know what they did with the follow-on generations, F-22, F-35. Never flew them beyond my scope, but they very wisely knew that you had this whole core of people that were trained on mechanizing and using the Eagle radar a certain way. So they didn't change that, because that would probably have been really, really stupid. So the mechanization in the cockpit was the same. You had an area of altitude that you're looking at. You rolled it up, you rolled it down, you go out wide in azimuth, you could narrow out the azimuth. Exactly the same. No change whatsoever in how I, as the pilot, interacted with the radar screen and the HOTAS controls. But what it allowed me to do was tag somebody, let's say way up high, shoot a missile at them, roll my radar completely off of them, and then go look down low while I'm simultaneously maintaining the weapons quality support to that AMRAAM. And that's just phenomenal. That was really cool. No, go ahead. They piggybacked on our training. They didn't try to, reinvent it and have us start from square one, which I think was wise.
Were there parts of it that were frustrating or difficult or not logical or intuitive? Were there any aspects to bringing that new radar into the airplane that were frustrating?
There was really only one frustration, and this is really minor, because the combat capability that it gave you was so important that this was a minor thing. But just the way that our DNA is wired, they had to put some extra weight in the tail, because there was a little extra weight to this new radar system in the nose. And so consequently for BFM, where the radar really is, you're not using it, you're just using the little auto-act modes that you've had forever, is for BFM, it didn't perform quite as well as the straight C. It was a little heavier, the nose was a little bit slower. And being who we were, just as fighter pilots, that would piss us off. But the trade-off in the big picture was absolutely worth it. But we're going to bitch and complain about something. So at the bar, we bitch and complain that the new AESA radar guys, the jets, were not as good in BFM as the straight C models, just for the turn rate and stuff like that. And it was, we're talking a minutia difference, but that was important to us.
Were there, so one of the things that you hear sometimes people reflect on now about things like fiddle, data links, automation in airplanes, is that it kind of, other skills atrophy, core skills atrophy. There's a conversation at the moment. I know you're not a Navy guy, so you won't be interested, but the Navy's talking about getting rid of carrier qualification from effectively their B course, and it's something you do now when you get to the fleet, and there's a PLM which the airplane will land itself, and all these things. And then the crusty old guys are like, well, there's some core skills, and you've got to have the core skills, and learning it, and other guys who are sort of let's say more progressive are saying, yeah, but if those systems fail, the airplane's going to depart controlled flight, and you're going to have to eject anyway, because this is all built into the airplane. So were there you've got fighter data link, you've got the AESA radar. Were there skills that you as an experienced F-15 pilot at that point, who had come through the A model, with the really old 63 through to the newer models of the 63, that you saw atrophying? Were there parts to the technological revolution in inverted commas that was happening to the airplane that made you concerned about the loss of core skills? Did it sit comfortably with you? What were your feelings?
No, actually, I think it was a little bit the reverse, partly because, I was a little bit of an older guy as a lieutenant colonel during this assignment and had all that background that you just referenced. There were a new set of skills to be able to integrate in your mind how you're using, because keep in mind that our fiddle display was not overlaid with our radar display. In fact, one was up to the right, the other one's kind of down low to the left. So developing how you time manage and how you reference, and when you look at one screen, when you look at the other, when you're looking outside, that was the set of skills that we were working on. I didn't really worry, nor did I note that there were like some core skills that were going away in some very unusual situations. there were times where I could reference back to my A model time where I'm like, just based off of, the way that the brick is moving, my experience told me what was happening before even the radar had figured it out potentially. But those are really unusual and were not very important. We worked much harder on being as effective as we could be using the technology that was available. And truthfully, we were, pretty excited about the things that we had there because they really do help. The building of the situational awareness, you can spend so much less time worrying about the position and the formation of where all your friendly forces are. Fiddle takes care of a lot of that. Doesn't mean you're not doing visual lookout. It doesn't mean you're not making sure you don't crash airplanes together. But there is a certain availability of information. You can take a quick glance at Fiddle and see everybody's pretty much where they should be. So yes, I'll look around, but I've got some confidence that everybody's doing things right. Or you look at Fiddle and something's not right. Now you'll spend more time. So you're able to manage that time sequence better with having the Fiddle information available. Same thing for targeting. In my early days in the F-15, we were talking a lot because that was the only way we could communicate clearly who was targeting what airplanes where. And that whole process developed substantially over my time in the Eagle. But now you get down to Fiddle, and with one glance, you can see lines and blinks if they're shooting from different members of your formation to the different adversaries that you have. And you get a high confidence, and you can concentrate any comm that you might need to do on potentially something that's wrong, rather than having to build this picture across our formation of 4 or more airplanes using comm, so that it flying quiet and being quiet and deadly is really what you're seeking to be.
Can you talk a little, Shamu, about tactics development? I mean, I'm not asking you about the tactics, but I'm asking about the development of the tactics. The Eagle is famous for having the Eagle wall, the 4-ship formation, which, as I understand it, was devised really to get the radars of those 4 airplanes looking out and doing exactly what you just described, the high look, low look, and different quadrants and so on, to maximize the firepower of that 4-ship. So it's a bit of a leading question, but did AESA change that? Did AESA mean that the 4-ship was no longer
not really. And I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It may take me a moment. Let's see. But no, it didn't. The tactics stayed the same. And having the AESA, it meant that you basically just had better information earlier, and you had more information to share across that Fiddle data link network than you would if you just had straight C model radars. But the tactics didn't really change because, and I'll run this back in a certain way. A lot of the tactics have a lot less to do with the radar than they do your weapons. So your weapons and what you're able to do or not do with your weapons a lot of times is more important in the development of your tactical approach. And I'll just use a very simple example. When we had the AIM-7, which required us to support it all the way to impact, there was no launch and leave opportunity. Therefore, there were no launch and leave tactics. It just didn't make sense. Once you add AMRAAM into the mix, and at a certain point you can launch and leave, then you add launch and leave tactics. The radar, yes, the C model was a little bit better than the A, but the radar fundamentally didn't change. But the tactics changed radically because of the capability of the weapon.
Did you have, so with that in mind, I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask was whether or not, because you still have the same AMRAAMs, and I know the Air Force is developing AIM, what is it, 280, whatever it's going to be, I
haven't even heard. So
it's the new AMRAAM. I can't remember the designation for it. I think that's, there are early pictures of that coming out now. So that's something that will be coming into play in the future. And, the unclassified discussion is that it's being, doubles the range or whatever. So
right.
Did you therefore experience some of the same challenges in the sense that, okay, you get better information earlier, but you still have a timeline that is X number of seconds for that missile in flight until it goes autonomous and so on and so forth. So some of those challenges were not really sort of remedied by the AESA, but
no. And the one that I think that your audience probably does understand, but the general public does not when it comes to air, is probably one of the most tasking elements to that is making sure you have, no kidding, a positive ID in all the ways that are required, not because it's bureaucratically required. Yes, it's in the spins or whatever, but because that's what you need to have high confidence that you're killing the right guy. That it's not a weird friendly. It's not one of your guys flying by somebody who is, one of the bad guys, but you're going to throw a missile in there that may not figure it out. So that element of it really didn't change as far as, that requirement and the amount of work it took to do that correctly. We were very good at it, and we had very good systems to support us in doing that. But, that stayed pretty much the same.
Did you mix?
What the AESA would do is maybe give you at the longer ranges, a clearer picture on what you were facing, and maybe give you a little bit more time to run some of those elements. And especially if you start to throw in theater assets beyond just our four-ship, give you the time and space and to work with them maybe to get some of that stuff done.
So did you mix then, Shamu, if you had a four-ship, would you mix two AESA airplane with two?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
As a general rule, that's exactly how we would fly. Normally, number 1 and number 3 were the AESA jets, and number 2 and number 4 were straight C models, which we liked a lot because being older guys, we were generally number 1 and number 3. So that worked out nicely. But we flew anybody that, everybody was trained on it. But that was the way to do that. And the capability of the wingmen and stuff would improve as well, because even though their radar may not see what you're seeing through fiddle, they'd have increased awareness of what was going on beyond the capability of their radar.
You mentioned earlier then, so your war role was to go and support PACAF, in maybe a North Korea or a scenario with China as an adversary. How did you feel at that time then, your sort of technical parity or overmatch with, let's say, China was? Did you feel like with the introduction of AESA, with the introduction of FIDL, you had a technical overmatch? Was there, were you looking at the intelligence reports coming out and thinking, it would be a tough fight? How did you feel it was going to go? If it had kicked off, how did you feel it was going to go?
Yeah, well, there are two different kind of scenarios. In the Korean scenario, we really felt that the Korean air forces that we were going to face, were technologically way behind where we were, and we're not catching up in any rapid pace. But what you had there was sheer numbers that you need to worry about. And then in the Chinese scenario, I don't think they had done a lot of their ramping up, but we anticipated that a lot of the Russian improved technology, the Su-27s, the Su-20 or Su-35s and all that stuff, that technology would be migrating to them. And so we were adapting in training towards more and more of those threats. And there you could see the approach, and we didn't know exactly, but you could definitely tell that technological parity, particularly in the weapons arena, was occurring. And so how do we deal with that? What do we need to do different? How are we going to handle this?
Did you deploy to South Korea or to Japan? Okay.
No, we did a deployment to Guam where we did a big exercise with the Navy. I think it was called tandem thrust, if I remember correctly. And that was cool and interesting. But some of the squadrons did go to Korea. The E models went there a lot. I remember that. And I'm trying to think if I think there were at least a couple exercises where the C models did go, and also they would support the ally building stuff in Singapore and Thailand and some of the other important countries in the Pacific. And so that did happen. I did not get to go on one of those, but there were these Cope Tiger and different exercises that that would be supported by jets from Alaska.
So did you get to do any? I mean, I know that there's Red Flag Alaska now. I don't know if there was when you were there, but
there was.
There
Yes.
was. Did you get to do that? I mean, so when you took these aeroplanes, these advanced Eagles, let's call them, into an exercise, did you absolutely spank everybody else and sort of dominate? How well did you get on?
Yeah. The interesting thing about living in Alaska is a lot of times our role, because we're there, many times would be to support as red air for the visiting F-18s and the visiting F-16s and the visiting other people. So a lot of times, because they would always try to program in and bring in red air, and somebody's going to cancel. So the go-to answer would be, can we get the folks that are already living there, to support that? So we did some red flag blue force, and I don't think that just having an AESA radar will necessarily make or break how that large scale fight's going to go. That would be an exaggeration. But and a lot of times, if you're red air, you're trying to do the tactics and the limitations on whatever you are trying to simulate. Not very important in that regard.
What about fifth gen integration? I mean, F-22s ended up in Alaska. They took over the 90th Fighter Squadron from those Strike Eagles you referenced earlier.
They were not even operational by the time that I left Alaska. So okay. there were none. Yeah.
Okay. So you really were trailblazing in that sense then? I mean, the AESA...
I think we did. Yeah, I'm sure there were some that kind of knew that this was a look into the future of what would be coming down the pipe. But I don't think I was necessarily aware of it. We just thought it was a really cool upgrade. And our hope was that the whole fleet would get, outfitted this way, which in a way kind of happened later on. And what I mean by that is I believe, now that they're fielding the F-15EX that has an AESA radar, which would make sense. You just wouldn't do the old one. And we were hoping that would have been much more rapid, but money and everything else, it didn't happen during that time frame.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking gizmos or Gucci gear or whatever, however you want to characterize it, let me just ask it, it's a sideline, but let me just ask you about IRST, infrared search and track. So, noticeably, the C-model community in more recent years got hold of, I think it was called the Legion pod, which was a little pod that they would sort of put on the centerline hard point and had an infrared search and track device in it. And then it looked like they dumped it. I don't know whether or not they were just not impressed with that pod or they weren't impressed with the capability. But, just as an Eagle driver, what is your view on IRST and its place in the arsenal of an interceptor or an air superiority fighter like the F-15?
Yeah, I definitely saw the potential for it to be helpful with, particularly when you want to stay as passive as possible. But I don't, given how good we were with the tools that we had, we did not, or at least I did not view it as essential, as in without this, we're definitely at a big disadvantage. But we could see where that if it was added, there would be situations and scenarios where it would be advantageous, but I think we were pretty comfortable with the capabilities that we had, and we didn't feel like we were particularly lacking because we didn't have it. Adversary aircraft, particularly the Russians, they employ it a lot, and so we did see that there was advantages there, but nothing that was a showstopper, at least in my mind.
Just on a slightly different topic as well, but staying in Alaska just for the moment. I did just have a guy called Fred Niles on the channel, A10 guy. He talked a lot about, I asked him a lot, and so therefore he talked a lot about survival aspects, jumping out of the airplane in Alaska.
Yeah.
He described a time when he and a wingman were flying, in the middle of nowhere, and this brown bear just got up on two legs and roared at them, as they flew by. And he said there and then he decided that if he ever came across a brown bear, he was done. What were your thoughts on survival aspects in Alaska? I mean, I flew in the back of 19th Fighter Squadron Eagle over Alaska a few years back.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things we did was we flew up this glacier, up to a big mountain. And I looked down and it was just full of crevasses. And I just thought, I don't want to jump out of an airplane ever anyway, but if I had to, this is the place that I would least like to do it, because knowing my luck, I would fall through one of those crevasses. So it's not just brown bears or moose.
there are way too many easy ways to get killed on the ground in Alaska. So you definitely did not want to jump out in Alaska, if you could avoid it. Not that you ever want to jump out. But Alaska was the only place where that I flew where that during training, a lot of guys routinely flew with sidearms. And that made tremendous sense because that's probably the only thing that you'll have on the ground that may deter the bear. The joke in the squadron was that, if you had a revolver and had 6 shots, 5 were to deter the bear, and the last one was to avoid suffering on your part. So, but that was, just fighter pilot dark humor. But so it is a place where you knew that if you got out, you better figure out how to live there for a little while because the distances are just so great. Now they do have excellent, there were excellent Coast Guard assets. There was excellent rescue assets within the Alaskan NORAD region, but time and distance, it's going to take a while. And, it's hard to find somebody on the ground in Alaska.
So on a serious note then, well, not that wasn't serious, but on a more serious note, flying in the winter months when it's darker, did you at that point in the F-15 have night vision goggles? We
did.
You did. So
yeah.
how was that experience of flying for extended periods, mostly in the dark?
In some of it, we kind of cheat in Alaska. And a lot of the guys don't tell this to their families, but when winter comes around in Alaska, we take the airplanes and we go to really nice places like Guam, Hawaii, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. And so my wife always kind of jokes that she spent 2 winters in Alaska and I spent none. So yes, we did do some flying. It's a lot more limited. There's limited, daylight hours and stuff. And we would use the night vision goggles. I was never a particularly big fan of the night vision goggles. I also had really limited experience in it, in that some folks have done it at previous operational assignments. We did not have it at the RTU. We did not teach it at the RTU. And I definitely didn't have it when I was in the A model. So some folks maybe had a little bit more familiarity and comfort level with it. I used it primarily when I was in the Middle East flying no-fly sorties in Iraq. And there, in that environment, it was useful, like to find tankers and see the other guys that were capping near you. Almost a little bit like Fiddle, it was more useful in determining where friendly forces were, and a lot less useful because of the very soda straw nature of what it does in finding adversaries or employment in that regard. So we did some training with it on that. I was never really overly impressed, mainly because the very small visual. To me, if I had to choose Fiddle or night vision goggles for a night combat sortie, I will take Fiddle. Other guys may have different opinions. I could be 100% wrong on that, but that's the way that I felt about it.
It's a very nerdy question, Shamu, but when you wear night vision goggles and you start pulling Gs, do they move around so you then can't see out of them? What is the actual experience, the physiological experience of wearing them and pulling Gs?
Since you're using them at night, you're not going to pull the same kind of Gs that you probably would do during a day sortie, just for the whole night disorientation. And if you need to do that, you're probably reacting defensively to other things within your cockpit. And the night vision goggles aren't that important. Yeah, they're a pain in the rear. We did a little bit of practice BFM with them just to kind of see what you could and couldn't do in a training thing. And especially if you're an older guy and you have glasses, so now the sweat's running across your glasses as you're trying to see through this little tiny straw and all that. Yeah, they're not good for Gs. That's why helicopter guys use them more, I think, than high-speed fighter guys do.
Do you think just final question on this? I'm not going to just keep talking about NOGs the whole time, but just a final question on it. In a wartime scenario, would they be especially useful for picking up? I mean, you've just said that you wouldn't necessarily be great for picking up adversary aircraft, but missile launches from other aircraft, missile launches from the ground when the burner stage, the rocket stage, whatever it's called, burns out, and then it's just a slight glow coming out of it. Would they be useful for those sorts of things?
I really don't know. On one hand, sure, because without that, you're probably not going to see, the IR energy, the visual energy could be very masked and you may not see it or notice it. So on one hand, potentially, but the big limitation that I always go back to when it comes to NOGs, at least the generation that I used, and these were pretty early ones. These aren't probably as good as they are now, but the field of view is so small. I'll give you, do you hunt? Do you hunt with a rifle scope? Okay. For those in the audience that hunt with a rifle scope, it would be like trying to find your prey while looking through the rifle scope. Probably not very effective. What you're really going to do is you're going to look out and see the deer or whatever, and then bring the rifle scope to it to get more detail and more precise. To me, that's how I viewed NOGs. I'm probably using my radar and my other systems to find what I'm interested in, and then if it's a night sortie, then adding some amount of information potentially from the night vision goggles. But so in the big picture, I think you'd have to be pretty lucky to have them on and be looking in the right spot, because the field of view is so small that there's a much higher probability that you're not seeing. I would rather be looking at my screens generally in the airplane with all that information. I think I have a better chance of discovering something that's threatening me there than be doing this with a little tiny soda straw.
Yeah. Okay, so I lied. I've got one more question then, because you talked about the field.
Let go of this.
I can't.
This
I'm sorry.
thread.
So really genuinely final question on this then. So if you have this narrow field of view, are you able to look through the heads-up display with them? Are you looking at numbers in the heads-up display, or do you have to sort of peek underneath them?
They are literally to look visually way into the distance to see something at night. Okay. So if I'm flying in a cap or whatever, and I think that there's F-18s over the side of me, and if I look outside, all their lights are off, right? Because we're in a combat scenario. So I don't see anything. But if I pull up the night vision goggles, then I can kind of move around and I will find their heat signature and be able to see where they are and where they're going. But it's a lot easier if either from Fiddle or my radar or something, I have at least an idea using canopy code or whatever to look in a certain direction at a certain elevation, and then you're probably going to find them with the NOGs. If you're just doing a search pattern with them, that's probably not very effective use of your time.
Okay. Tell us then, Shamu, where did you go from Alaska?
So I finished up at Alaska, and then I was very, very lucky, I thought, to get a flying staff job with the Air Combat Command Inspector General Team at Langley Air Force Base. And normally, which the job that I thought I was going to, you arrive and you give two types of inspections to fighter units generally, not just Eagles, but F-16s, A-10s, whatever we had available. Either an operational readiness inspection, which is kind of the more fun kind of an inspection from an inspector's point of view. You're running some sort of a simulated war at their wing, and there's flying involved, and they're doing missions, and I'm flying on those missions and grading guys and grading their tapes and all that kind of stuff. Or you give the one that's really not fun at all, was called a UCI. I'm sure they've changed 1,000 times since I got out, but that was like a paperwork, creepy investigation, and do they do all their testing correctly and all their record keeping correctly, and it's kind of like a necessary evil, like spring cleaning or whatever, or getting the house ready before the in-laws come over, one of those things. But that's what I thought I was going to do, but that's not what I ended up doing for the majority of my time on the ACCIG. I arrived at the end of August in 2001. And on the 11th of September, 9/11 of 2001, they had the meeting where the wing commander was going to welcome a whole bunch of new guys, the ones that were going to the ACC staff like me, the ones that were new to the first fighter wing. All those guys were all in this meeting room to meet with the wing commander, which was now the same guy that was that operations group commander when I went to Alaska. So he had hopped forward to Langley, and I don't think he had anything to do with my assignments. He may have, I don't know. But we're in that meeting when airplanes started to hit the World Trade Center. And so everything changed completely at that point. the obviously the whole country went on a war footing in order to go over into Afghanistan and do all those, important things. And from our perspective, for an air-to-air community, remember how that NORAD mission was kind of a back burner? We take care of it. It's not all that important. Well, it's important, but it doesn't require a lot of attention and resources. And we really were focused on being as lethal as we could for the other wartime scenario. That swapped. So now doing that became vitally important. And oh, by the way, the structure of the United States to do that mission in its entire across the military had really, really atrophied from the end of the Cold War in approximately 1990 to 11 years later in 2001. I had some insight on that because I was at NORAD in the plans shop. It's called the J5, but we developed plans in the mid 90s. And what we were working on was the collapse of all these alert sites. At their peak, in the very high in the United States, they have like 26 different alert sites, more in Canada and others in Alaska and all this kind of stuff. And by the time that I had left in approximately 1998, we were down to 4 main sites with a couple of satellites. So I think there was like 6 or 7 total across the entire country. Obviously not very many for a place as large as the United States is. But even keeping those, from what I witnessed, I was just a major doing what I was told, but working on these projects and briefings and all this kind of stuff was a major fight just to keep those. The military in its entirety wanted to completely shut down the NORAD mission in the United States, basically under the premise that the Cold War had ended and there was no more need to do that. I will tell you that both the military at large, corporate, and even us in NORAD, we still had an outward focus. Nobody envisioned. We didn't envision. We never talked about it. We never exercised it. So we never thought of somebody using an airplane, particularly a commercial airplane, within the borders to as a kamikaze missile, as it were. And so that was not on the radar at all as far as what we were considering. We thought it was important to at least keep a core capability for what we called at that point asymmetric threats, which is rogue people or drug cartels or whoever that would maybe launch some cruise missiles or something at the United States. At a minimum, we needed some capability if that scenario was unfolding to go deal with it. So that's what we dealt with on 9/11. Meeting shut down, everybody went home, the wings started doing their stuff, and that's when I kind of went into the mode of, I'm very familiar with NORAD stuff. I've done that mission as an Eagle driver at Langley. I've done it at Alaska. And the Air National Guard, which was doing that mission at that point, they weren't structured to support 24/7 ops ad infinitum for months or years on end. So they were great in getting their guys back as quickly as they could and spinning them up. But they really, and some of your other guests have talked about in relation to the Gulf War, how difficult the manning piece was to keep high tempo operations. Air National Guard squadrons by nature are smaller, both in number of airplanes and number of people. So they were going to run out of guys real fast. So within about 10 days to 2 weeks, I had called around to the various Air National Guard guys and said, I'm an Eagle driver, I'm fully qualified, I've done the NORAD mission, blah, blah, blah. If you need help, my boss was great at the IG. I told him what I was proposing, and he said, you pay for your trips on our dime. You can go there for free, which is huge because even in this situation, money is important. So I would call him and say, I can come up for free and fly for as long as you need me. So I would go to, the first one I went to was Otis Air National Guard Base in Massachusetts. They were the unit that responded initially to New York City. In fact, my checkout pilot was the lead on that very first sortie. So when I got there and he kind of gave me the, hey, we're going to go and do a mission, I'll show you what we're doing and all that. So we went up and capped over New York City. There was still remnants of smoke coming from the ground when we did that. Wow. So that was kind of eye-opening. And so I did that. And then from there, I went and I did missions with Langley over Camp David when the president was at Camp David. I did missions over the White House. I also went out to Mountain Home because they were also still, nobody knew how this was all going to unfold. So they're trying to prepare for their wartime mission, but they had a NORAD commitment. Vice President Cheney had a ranch in Wyoming, and so they needed cap coverage over where he was, and that was conducted out of Mountain Home. So I went to Mountain Home and did those missions with them. So that kind of stuff all went on. I think all of us kind of knew at least in the Eagle community that, that attack had happened, but the likelihood of a repeat was exceedingly low because now it's almost like Pearl Harbor in World War II, right? Complete surprise. It turns your whole world upside down, but trying to do that kind of a surprise attack again, probably not going to happen. We kind of felt similarly, but both for political reasons and everything else, it's a no-fail mission. You cannot have that happen again. So therefore, you're going to put whatever resources are necessary, which was primarily Eagles, but a lot of Vipers, F-18s, everybody contributed that needed to. And so that's what we started doing. Who did we really deal with? Primarily folks that were just making mistakes. The one memorable one I have is I was camping over first President Bush's residence or near it in Maine. And there was, I'm confident, we called them doctors without a clue, but there was some little guy in a little Cessna, and he was flying right towards their house. And I'm sure he did not know it. And they had published, no-fly zones and NOTAMs and all the things they're supposed to. I'm sure he didn't read them, but we went by him once, and he didn't quite get it. We went by him again, dropping flares, and you could see him visibly shake because the airplane was wobbling as he immediately turned and went away. And he had no ill intent, but we can't determine that to a high degree of accuracy. If he turns away, he doesn't have ill intent. If he keeps on going, things are going to get bad quick for him. And I'm sure he got to land, he got to talk to a sheriff and maybe some other federal people, and I'm sure his life was not a lot of fun. But that was mainly what actually happened. But our presence there was important to the nation in order to make sure that, nothing else bad happened because everybody was kind of on, rocky times. People were worried.
Can I ask a little bit about the psychology of, you just said that the likelihood of another airliner flying in being used as a kamikaze was very low. But did you have to, in your mind, think about or not think about the possibility you might have to take down an airliner full of people?
Absolutely did think about it. And I'm not trying to be callous. I'm no hero, but my job would be with and I don't make this decision in the cockpit. Let's be very clear about that. There is a very prescribed scenario for that thing to happen, and it's going to go to very high levels of government. High levels within the NORAD chain of command, high levels within, the White House and the Department of Defense. But if told to do it, and my situational awareness, I will tell you that at least in my mind, as a fighter pilot, it's my finger on that pickle button. I have to have situational awareness that this is going the way that it appears to go. And if there's things that are screwed up, I may kind of slow it down to see if I can get an additional piece of information that changes the picture. But if required, it would suck. I don't know how I would deal with it afterwards because I never had to do that. May completely ruin my life. But at that point, when you're up there and you've got, 8 missiles across your airplane and they're all real and armed, yes, I would say all of us were prepared to use them if necessary. The history, I was not part of this, but if you go back, there was people that were launching without missiles on 9/11 on that day, and they were seriously discussing, potentially using their airplane to take it down. We didn't have that level, but I don't think there was any. I didn't have any moral reservations. Let's put it that way. That if the situation called for it and the approval authorities were appropriate, and in my mind the situation made sense that this needed to happen, it was going to happen.
with regards to the smaller airplanes, the doctors without a clue, I love that.
Yes.
If you're allowed to answer the question, how would you take that type of target down? Would you gun it? I mean, could you shoot a sidewinder at a little target like that? Would it have a heat signature you could lock onto? Or would you have to?
Yeah, I think I can definitely discuss that. I actually, in one thing you need to keep in mind, you are now not flying over some barren desert in the Middle East. You're not flying over, enemy territory somewhere. You're flying over where your citizens and people live. So it's unlikely that my first choice would be to use the gun, just because those bullets are falling somewhere, and they're pretty big, 20 millimeter. And yes, hopefully it's a big earth, small bullet theory, but probably an AIM-9 is, for a small airplane like that, would be the weapon of choice. Very precise, relatively small warhead, and the least likely to have an impact on. And there's a big, are you over an urban area? Are you out in the country? I mean, there's a lot of factors in there, but I would say that probably the AIM-9 would be the weapon of choice. Once again, a little airplane is highly unlikely to be the threat that you're going to be worried about. You can't fit much explosives on it and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's how I would answer that.
Can we talk a little about the setup for Noble Eagle then, in terms of the communications, who you were talking to? It's tragic. There is that clip on the internet of the man who stole the, I don't remember what it was, Q400 or something. He committed suicide in the end. He flew it into an island, but he was joyriding it and flying it and barrel rolling it and stuff like that. And there was and the video's on the internet. I can share it with you, Shamu.
Yeah.
There's some Eagle guys who are talking to some NORAD agency, but they're not actually talking to the tower, because I don't know if it's because they've got the wrong type of radio. They don't have the right type of radio to talk to the tower or whatever.
Yeah, Eagles are, for the most part, and may have changed by now, I don't know what's in the EX, but we were UHF only, ultra high frequency. Small airplanes typically have VHF radios, different radio band. Things like the A-10 and the F-16s, a lot of them, they will have both, but we did not. So yeah, there's definitely a possibility that you could not talk directly to that guy. That's accurate.
So you were, when you were doing Noble Eagle, you were just talking to NORAD. You weren't actually talking to any air traffic control centers, or anything. Okay.
Right. So, and the way that NORAD is structured is they have a couple of sectors. The one that I'm most familiar with was the Northeast Air Defense Sector, because I did most of my flying up in there. But when I was out at like Cheney's Ranch, I was talking to the Western Air Defense Sector. But those are the guys that we would be talking to. They were also the ones with their ground GCI controllers that are basically giving us a picture and also giving us a heads up, because they are in contact with the FAA. So the whole system changed very abruptly, very quickly. And so now the communication links between the FAA and the sectors were very robust. I recently kind of reviewed the 9/11 report that the government issued afterwards. And, no big surprise to me based off what I saw during my NORAD time, but the communication links between the sectors and the FAA were not well defined, nor robust, nor routinely exercised in a high degree. I'm confident that's very different today. But by then, yes, the sector guys are who we talked to. They were very good and very competent. I actually went up and worked in the Northeast Air Defense Sector as like a night battle manager for a while. That was one of the other things I did to support Noble Eagle. That was not a volunteer thing. I would not volunteer for a non-flying thing. But, and in fact, it was the same Colonel Moore, who was the guy that was on duty when 9/11 happened. He was exceedingly cool and good to me, because I told him that, I'd really like to see if there's any way I can maintain my currencies. So what he did was have me work a bunch of shifts, cut me loose to go to Otis, fly, maintain my currencies, come back, do more shifts. So he didn't have to do that. He could have told me, unlucky dude, but he was great. So I got to see them in action, and I had high degree of familiarity with NORAD pre 9/11 because of my NORAD's experience. When I got to the Northeast Air Defense Sector, it was completely different. They had a lot better technology, a lot better access to all the radars for the entire country, and really, really robust good working relationships with all the FAA agencies that they needed to.
I just want to ask you a complete aside. I do have some other questions for you on Noble Eagle, but it's a complete aside. And I'm only asking it now because if I don't, I'll forget and then I'll kick myself. So fast forward to 2022 or something like that, and you have these sort of Chinese weather balloons flying over the United States, and the government saying, well, we don't have the radars capable of picking them up and we can't see these things, so we didn't know they were there. Based on your understanding of NORAD and the fact you worked in it and you've worked across multiple aspects within NORAD, is that feasible? Is it feasible that you could have things flying?
It is to me. And I'm not some kind of geeky radar engineer, but for anything, you design the system to look or to find certain things, right? So the radars that we have are designed to find what? Airplanes. Right, they're designed to find things that are moving fairly quickly across the sky because that's what airplanes do. And now you have something that's moving relatively slow. Yes, you can have slow things down on the ground, but generally those aren't too threatening because they're not going very fast, right? So it makes sense to me from an engineering perspective that the radars probably have, they're called filters. So because if they put every little thing that it saw in there, you have a jumble of garbage, right? So it filters out the things that aren't appropriate for what you're trying to do. So it doesn't surprise me that there may very well have been some sort of internal filters, not even necessarily controllable by the guy on the scope, that would have ignored that because it's like, it's just not important because that's not what I was told to go find. It's from a machine perspective. It sounds reasonable to me. I haven't done any research on it or technological data or anything like that. But from my experience and my background, that sounded, it didn't sound silly or like somebody trying to cover something up or anything. No, it would be like you design a go-kart and you design a Formula One car a lot differently. And a Formula One car is probably going to perform really crappily on a go-kart racetrack. It can't even make the turns. Is that the fault of the go-kart driver? The Formula One driver? No, that piece of equipment's not supposed to be on that track. Simultaneously, the go-kart's probably not going to win a Formula One race. So I think if you think about it in those terms, they had equipment, a very large system designed for a certain thing. And if you think about it, it was designed primarily for large bombers, but still going relatively high speed towards the United States and Canada, because it's a joint command. Canadians are great, by the way. I really enjoyed working with them.
I'm sure Sedlow is one of the guys who helps me with the channel. He's a Canuck. I'm sure he'll be grateful to hear that.
Yeah. Well, real quick aside, just because it's kind of the absolute best social event I had in my entire career was the Canadians arranged a combat dining in for a going away for a guy that we really respected. So we did a dining in with flight suits and white shirts and bow ties, and they set it up in tents and all this. And there was not a sober individual by the end of the night, and that was world class. They did a nice job.
Shamu, let me ask you a couple of questions then about the degradation or the atrophying of the NORAD capabilities.
Sure.
NORAD, so the sites and the capabilities. You said earlier that the new threat in inverted commas was sort of some malactors getting hold of some weapons, some terrorists doing that kind of stuff and lobbing them in the continental United States, as opposed to hordes of Soviet bombers coming over, the polar ice cap,
right,
or sort of transiting down the east coast of the US or whatever. Did that change then after 9/11? So the world of possibilities opened up because the terrorists did something that people were not expecting. Yeah. What did that do then to the positioning or the readiness of NORAD in the months and years afterwards?
I don't know, because by that point, I retired in 2007 and I was no longer working, actively with NORAD at that point. So I really don't know what they did or how they changed. My only experience with that is one of the things I did while I was that staff guy at NORAD is they had a really, really old simulator where they would run battle simulations for North America to see how many, bombers do you think we can kill? Where do the fighters need to be? What can they do? And I updated that for them when we ran simulations. And one of the things we added to it was, let's run simulations against a large number of cruise missiles from whatever direction. And I know the only thing I can tell you, it's a really, really difficult problem. I don't know how they're addressing it now. I'm sure it's still a very difficult problem. And truthfully, that's nothing surprising in this day and age because we're watching what's going on in Ukraine with drones, which is adding a whole new layer of complexity. The only good news there is a lot of the drones, the ranges are relatively small. But so, yeah, I don't know how they've adapted. Some of it, if you just think about it, very small things that can fly from very far away, finding them just thinking about the physics of it, that's a difficult problem. And there are probably technologies out there that they're looking into or are doing, but I don't really know what they are at this point.
Can you tell me a little bit about then when you volunteered to go and fly with these different units to help with the Noble Eagle mission as a qualified guy? And I hope this isn't a stupid question, but were the tactics or the procedures or the techniques that you had to employ to fly cap over cities and look out for civilian aircraft, doing things that they shouldn't have been doing or potentially doing things they shouldn't be doing, were those tactics and procedures already part of your playbook in the Eagle community? Did you have to devise them? Were the different units that you flew with doing everything the same? Was there some common unit?
There was a lot of commonality. Okay. Yeah, there had been for a long time, and I forget if it's either a chapter in 3-1 or if it's a small little 3-1 being the tactics manual that's prevalent in the United States Air Force. There was either a chapter that talked about NORAD and air defense kind of stuff in 3-1 for the F-15, or there was a separate 3-1 volume that dealt with it. That's too far back for me to remember exactly. But no, that had already kind of was out there. And truthfully, once again, I'll go back to, if you're a competent, well-trained Eagle driver, you can do that mission. In fact, you'll probably help to do it because you'll look at where they're telling you to cap versus what you're protecting, and you may very well give them some input on. It would be better for the radar look and for our intercept and all that to be a little further away, a little closer, whatever, so that you're positioned hopefully in the right place at the right time. And then they were relatively simple compared to a 4VX. I'll just put it that way. If you've trained and are ready for that, this is not going to. The hard part, truthfully, was the discipline to be up there for I think they were like 6-hour missions. They were long on station. A lot of refueling, a lot of night refueling, but the discipline to, no kidding, run your radar, even though you kind of know you're probably not going to see anything. That was probably the most challenging element to it. Was almost more of a personal thing. Just I need to do this, and I need to do it right. And you're listening to the picture, and you can tell everybody's gone to sleep, and there's no little airplanes flying around right now or whatever. But for your skill set, no, it was not difficult. And the things were very well standardized. As I went from Mountain Home to the various bases, Florida, Massachusetts, all over the place, they were doing pretty much the same thing. The briefings were very similar, which is pretty common across the Eagle community for even high-level employment beyond just that mission.
You talked earlier, very briefly, you mentioned rather than talked about, but you mentioned that you had gone to the desert and flown, I'm guessing sort of Southern Watch, Northern Watch type things.
I did. I did Southern Watch out of PSAB.
Okay. And so one of the things I have been told by, I think probably more than one Eagle driver who was, I guess, sort of contemporary of yours, was that the combination of Noble Eagle and then those sort of Southern Watch, Northern Watch missions for the Eagle community was actually a little detrimental to their skills.
I agree completely. Yeah.
Could you explain why?
Yeah, sure. So from a approximately 1990 up until about 2001, there was a constant presence at first, both in Northern Watch and in Southern Watch, of Eagles, doing no-fly enforcement over Iraq. And those and Noble Eagle sorties are very similar in that they're very long, they're resource intensive, and the training value. And I know you're not there to train, but the value you get out of those sorties, as far as your development and your ability to fight a big war, very, very limited. In fact, you're probably not doing the sorties that you really need to be doing to be ready for the big war. So while you're out there, your skills are degrading. I had a really, really good squadron commander. I was the DO at the time when we were doing Southern Watch, and he really worked hard to maximize our opportunity to keep the guys flowing. So the jets that were doing the Southern Watch did that, but we worked hard with maintenance to make sure that we had as many jets as possible to do BFM. We did dissimilar BFM with the French, dissimilar BFM with the British, a little bit of ACT and ACM, just trying to, as best as possible, slow that deep degradation down. But absolutely everybody that would come back from the desert, you would have to basically start at square one and start doing BFM for a while, and then build up to ACM and ACT and DACT and large force employment, because those skills would have atrophy. Flying fighters is a lot like a sport. The skill set degrades if you don't use it. The other thing that I will tell you that was a macro level impact, and we saw this when I was both at the RTU, is we started at the end of my RTU cycle, we started getting guys showing up to be instructors, and they had 1,500 hours, but they hadn't done anything. Yeah. And it's not their fault. They did what they were told, but their 1,500 hours were 6 hours at a time, capping over Iraq time and time again. And so now they're showing up technically with the requirements on paper to be an RTU IP, but they didn't have the actual experience of leading 2 ships, 4 ships in, complex training missions and the ability to teach others. So it was a challenge to get some of those guys up to speed, not because they're bad guys, but their hours and their actual experience were separated. They had the hours, but not. And in a way, sometimes you're just lucky where you are. When I was in the 48th Fighter Squadron earlier, we did a lot of support and a lot of neat things because everybody was out of town. So we were able to develop high levels of skill very quickly because we were active. When I was at Tyndall, they were trying to shrink the F-15 force. So our student load was lower. So we were taking our airplanes and doing exercises in El Paso for roving SANs, weapon school support, all that. So we were able to work on, develop, and sharpen our skills. The guys that were in the 1st Fighter Wing and the 33rd Fighter Wing, doing a lot of time in the desert, that opportunity was not provided to their youngest people who needed it the most.
What is the knock-on effect of that? Is that something that, you can, over a short period of time, 6 months, 12 months, you can mitigate that? Yeah. So there's no long-term impact where you've got a generation of guys.
An analogy I'd use is either for an American football player, we just started that season out here, or for a British football player who gets injured, right? And they're sidelined for a certain amount of time. And when they come out of that, they're not quite in shape. Their skills may be degraded, but it's only a few months, and then they're back on top of the step, and they're ready to contribute 100%. I would view it in a similar manner, but it definitely takes some time and some effort and some training to do. But for years on end, that was not easy to do. And the other thing that we definitely saw was those missions over Iraq. Those are they're brutal on the airplanes. You're putting a lot of time, mileage, as it were, on these systems. You're not pulling high Gs and all that, but that's okay. But you're putting a lot of time on the engines. You're putting a lot of times on all the components, and that adds up. So all what the Air Force had programmed out of this airplane should only need major maintenance in 6 years, suddenly it's needing it every year or two, and the whole system's not designed to support that. So that became a big issue.
Is it the same? I mean, I know it is, but maybe you could expound on it a little bit with regards to weapons. I think there's an unclassified chart that describes the reliability of the AIM-7 based on the number of flight hours it's flown, and it nosedives. The first time you fly with it, it's going to work probably.
Right.
The 10th time you've flown with it, pretty good chance it's not going to work. I know you won't discuss specifics, but did the same apply to the weapons you were carrying in the desert?
You're 100% right.
Okay.
The weapons are not designed for longevity. They're designed to be strapped on, take an airborne shot, and destroy themselves, right? So, and the idea is that when you're designing the weapons and you're doing a whole Air Force system, you're looking at what rate do we need to supply them, because they're falling off the other side as they're being shot and used, not that they're being strapped to airplanes and going up again and again and again with all the inherent vibration and temperature fluctuations and all that. The weapons weren't, that was not in the design of them, because you want to take a Volkswagen and use that as a weapon. You don't want to have a Mercedes that you've put a lot of money and engineering to just because it could last a long time. It's designed to die quickly. Its whole life cycle, if you're lucky, is like 40 seconds. So that definitely caused problems. I agree with that. And I don't know exactly how they fixed it in the logistic channels, but and they did a lot of testing. Tyndall is where they did the testing. So they would bring back some of these higher time weapons and we're testing them. And I don't know the results, but I'm sure they looked into it extensively.
Yeah. I think they're refurbishing. I don't know if refurbishing has always been a thing, but certainly refurbishing now is a thing.
Would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us a bit more, Shamu, about what you're doing career-wise then when Noble Eagle continues. I think it continues today.
So
I mean, what did you do?
A normal 3-year assignment at Langley, and the first 2 were highly involved in Noble Eagle, both with going to the Northeast Air Defense Sector and flying all those missions. And things kind of slowly started to return to normal. So the last year that we were there, we actually started giving the inspections to the various fighter units and all that kind of thing. And then when that ended, I got a follow-on consecutive back-to-back flying staff job. That's fairly unheard of. And they sent me to be a Stanoval pilot, a standards and evaluation for Air Force Central and 9th Air Force. It's kind of a conglomerated situation there. So I continued to fly, which was awesome. And I was flying with pretty much the same people. By this point, Langley is converting to the F-22. So the 94th is already converted, the 27th is converted, the 94th is in the process, and the 71st is getting ready to pick up like a T-38 mission. So my flying with Langley really started to go down, and I primarily started to fly with Eglin guys, mainly in the 58th and also in the 60th. So that's what was going on there, and that's when at times they would send me overseas to the Middle East to visit all of the air bases we had across the entire region and to take a look, I didn't give check rides or anything like that. That's not what we were doing, but looking at, were they doing kind of a lot of the right procedures and stuff to make sure that it was as safe as possible. And as a general rule, they were doing really well. Although one of the aspects that we were able to do was take best practices from this base, which is several countries away from another base, and go, hey, the guys over here at Al Dhafra are doing this way, and we thought that was really smart. Here's the guy's contact number. Here's what we saw, and pick it up. We're not going to tell you what to do, but we'll at least kind of cross-pollinate and share what we had. And that was really interesting because that gave me kind of more of the theater-wide perspective to how things were set up, visiting all fighter units, heavy units, AWACS units, tanker units, all that, and then seeing how all that integrated together.
One of the things that I wonder about with regards to this, so this is the second assignment you've had where you're flying, but in an attached way. is
Correct.
is
Yeah.
is is how you feel about it. I mean, do you miss the squadron camaraderie? Does actually it mean that you know
Absolutely.
loads
Yeah.
of people and so you get it wherever you go? What's the emotional and
Yeah.
psychological
No,
aspect?
that's a really excellent question. So you definitely are, you're not part of the core, but in general, they do treat you really well. I think I tried to be, and I don't know how successful I was, you'd have to ask them, but I tried to be very cognizant that although I was there with, some sort of a grading role for them, the idea was to maximize their capability for success, and minimize their opportunity for some silly thing to trip them up. So generally, the way it would unfold is I would start flying with a unit that was approaching an inspection and give informal, non-documented feedback to their leadership on, hey, these are the things that I'm seeing that may get some attention during an inspection. These are some other best practices that others have done well, and try to, because they're really too busy in many regards to do a full, preparation for these inspections. They're a necessary evil. Without them, things can kind of start to fray, and you don't know it until the blanket rips. But they also require a lot of attention, a lot of effort, a lot of extra time on people that are already really busy. So I tried to do that, and then when the actual inspection came out, we would try to make it as positive an experience as possible. The best deal is when the wing has set up a challenging inspection, they do really well with it, and you have all the drums beating and the horns blaring, and everybody's very happy at the end of it, and that's what we kind of worked on. But yeah, you definitely miss not being the normal member of a squadron, because truthfully that's the most fun that you'll ever have. But you realize that you're not part of that, you know.
Hopefully not a silly question, because I just don't know. I've never been in the military and I don't really know well enough about how it works. But how important is rank in those kinds of conversations? I mean, if you're going to a wing commander who may be a one-star general, I'm guessing in some instances, and you're saying your wing, I'm seeing some things in your wing that may get the wrong kind of attention. Is there I don't really know how to ask the question. Is there sometimes a reaction to that, which is, what do you know? I'm a general and you're a lieutenant colonel. Go away. How does it work?
That was not my experience. So first off, as a general rule, I would always try to engage at the lowest level that made sense. So most of the time, I am talking to the squadron commander that I'm flying with. Now, if wing commander said, "Hey, we're going to run this exercise. We'd like you to be our command post, observe it, and give me feedback," I absolutely would. First off, I'm going to be very polite about it, but I am going to be frank. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it. And many, many times, the guys that were the ops group commanders and the guys that were the wing commanders were guys that I'd flown with at Tyndall in particular, or Alaska, or both. So we had a pretty strong personal relationship to lean on. And so I'm not there to tell him what to do, but he knows that if I'm bringing it up, I wouldn't do it unless I thought it was important. I'm not trying to waste your time, and I'm trying to focus you on some things that I think might cause you embarrassment potentially during the exercise. And I know that's probably the number one thing you don't want. And how you fix it is your business. But that's what I would do. So every time I would do that, I write some emails and reports and give them to the appropriate level, but try to input it at the lower levels, and many times not say things to the higher levels unless they ask. I will tell you, these are smart guys. And as a general rule, they would go, "Come here, let's have a beer. What did you see this week? What did you like? What did you not like? What do we need to do?" And then, that opens the conversation for a lot of, and fighter guys debriefing each other, that's part and parcel to what we do. So I didn't find any awkwardness with that. And I will tell you that I think if ever at any point, if you found awkwardness on that regard, you probably have a wing commander that's not doing very well, right? If there's somebody out there that's not willing to listen to outside folks who do this all the time, they do one of these exercises once every 4 or 5 years. So on their base, there might be nobody who was actually at the last one that particular base did. Maybe some really crusty old sergeants. And if the wing commander is not willing to listen to those crusty old sergeants and not willing to listen to me because I know how the current exercises are being conducted, that's not a good recipe for success. But that was not my experience. As a general rule, they went, it was a very good interaction between us as the inspectors or potential inspectors and the guys that are practicing.
What sort of things might you see then that you would pick up on and provide a debriefing point on? I mean, you said earlier that you would ride in the back seat and
truthfully, I was not worried about their tactical employment. Generally, that was really, really good. From wheels up till parking the jet was not the issue. But it's so when you do these like an ORI, I'm not going to talk about the queepy inspection. It's not important. It would bore your audience to tears. But the operational readiness inspections, a lot of it would involve, like dealing with like chemical warfare and the procedures to put all that garbage on to go out to the jet and how you're going to do it and how you're reporting it. And, just like the NORAD mission where you're doing a lot of stuff where you're reporting, well, in an ORI, there's a lot of like weapons reporting, which doesn't seem too important to me as a pilot. But the guys on the ground in the weapons shop need to know how many AMRAAMs do we need to build out to get back on your jet. And it's not just me, it's the whole wing. So those kind of things, if I saw procedurally where there was missteps or bad communication, it was easy for me to pick up on that because that's what we did. And we'd seen it done well other places. So I go, hey, you might need to tighten up on the pilots to speak slowly and accurately on the number of weapons, using the right codes. I know it seems queepy to them, but in the big picture, your weapons guys are going to fail if they don't get a good flow of information. And that's a reasonable example.
That makes me think about what you were saying much earlier about the sort of the satellite fields that were in Alaska that, you kept in, I think you said WRM status.
Yeah.
Were you, one of the things that the Air Force is talking about these days is ACE, Agile Combat Employment, the idea that you would deploy to a semi-prepared or maybe a busted up airfield or whatever and still be able to fly combat operations out of it. You carry the weaponry that you're gonna need with you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As part of the ORI model then, were you always inspecting based on people, units deployed to beautifully pristine, maintained bases, or would you put them in that scenario too?
Yeah. So the way there were two flavors to it. The large active duty wings, like Langley and like Eglin, would normally employ from where they were. But part of that was they have thousands of people, and the cost of moving them to somewhere else is just prohibitive. So they would generally employ. Now they might not let them use their squadron building and have them go across the runway and operate austerely out of some tents and stuff like that, as to simulate as best they could. The ones that really did it right, in my opinion, but the one they can do it because of their size, is that back then, I don't know if it still exists today, was the Air National Guard. They had a couple of, one was at Gulfport, Mississippi. They had a little base basically that was designed just to be used for exercises and ORIs. So they would completely leave their home station, pack up whatever they need, arrive there, and as you probably realize or have talked to guys, you don't realize that you packed the wrong screwdriver until you get hundreds of miles away from it, and you can't just run into the back and go, oops, and grab a new one and come back out, right? It's completely gone. Either you packed the right things or you didn't. All those kind of things, which actually have, legitimate combat employment, impacts, they would do that. And so that was a lot of fun, setting up the exercises and participating with them that they did that. They had, one is down by Savannah, and the other one, I think, was Gulfport, Mississippi. And we had an Eagle unit that did each of them, that I helped them with those inspections. And that was pretty cool. And you could also tell that, even though they're not outside of the United States, they're far enough away from home and family and kids and all that, that they very much took on a deployed attitude as it were. And I thought did it really, really smartly.
Final question on this theme then. When you've been talking, I've been sort of thinking about how much you as an individual need to know in order to be able to assess these things. I mean, presumably you're part of a team. You're going to have somebody in the team who's a specialist in nuclear, biological, chemical.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yep.
so you kind of have a good high level.
I bring a certain expertise, but it's a very small slice of a very large pie. And I would definitely run into things that were outside of my area, but it just didn't look right. But there would be somebody on the team. I'd go, hey, Sergeant so-and-so, Major so-and-so, whatever. Would you take a look here that something seemed off? I don't know if I just don't understand it, or if maybe there's some room for improvement for these guys that you could help them out with. Yeah, you're 100% correct.
One of the things you'd said to me, Shamu, in our email discussions before we did our first interview was that I think you said you had been part of an accident investigation looking at an F-15 crash. Is that something you can talk about?
Correct. Oh, yeah, no problem. I won't use any names or anything to, not impinge the innocent. But and this is kind of an interesting story in that we actually did an ORI while we were at Tyndall, which seems really bizarre because we did technically have a wartime mission of sorts. And it was kind of NORAD based because we're stateside. We're not deploying overseas. We had older airplanes. And on like the very first day of the ORI, we had multiple bags of gas, and a guy tried to do a low to high conversion on a Learjet up high. What he did not realize at the time was one of his bags of gas was not feeding. So you had a full tank on one side, an empty tank on the other, major league imbalance. And when he got relatively slow at high altitude, it spikes the AOA and it can send you into a spin. And he went into a spin and ended up punching out, and the jet basically pancaked into the Gulf of Mexico. He was fine, which was obviously the most important thing. I'm sure the folks in leadership that were running the ORI are like, great way to start. How are we doing so far? But I'm not sure if it was the ops group commander or the wing commander at the time tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd like you to be our representative on the accident investigation board. So they pulled me out of that and sent me to work for that. The guy who ran it was really, really cool. He always referred to me as the spy because he knew damn well as soon as we kind of closed up for the day, there were things I couldn't tell them, but I would be going back to leadership and going, hey, I think it's, it's looking okay, or it looks like the maintenance guys are going to be okay in this and whatever. And so he always called me the spy. But I talked to him very early on. I said, I don't want to just sit here and, watch you guys write the report. I'm sure you'll tell me what I need to know. What could I do to help? And he goes, well, I am short somebody, and I need somebody that knows the F-15 to go help the recovery team pull it out of the water. And then when we get it back, we can learn a lot more as they look into, was there a mechanical malfunction, all that stuff. Sign me up. So this is my James Bond experience. The first thing I do is go out with this little old dude on his little tiny fishing boat kind of thing. And he was almost like, have you ever seen the movie Jaws? Yeah. From the early, the boat captain on Jaws, the one with the cigar, and he's, Todd's gruff and everything. And he's taking them out to go find the shark. This guy was like the Gulf's version of him. And I'm there with a couple of sonar experts. I think they were contractors, and we're trying to find the airplane. And so we do it, and we go back and forth in this grid pattern, and we find the airplane, which was really pretty cool. The guys brought this really fancy buoy. It must have been a $4,000 buoy, and it had lights, and it blinked, and it did this, and it did that, and they're tying it up, and they're dropping the little anchor for it to where the location is. And the gruff old guy goes, don't use that buoy. And they said, no, this is we can get GPS and we can do this. He goes, it won't be here when you come back. He goes, use a milk jug. Put your initials on a milk jug, tie a rope, and put it down. That's what we do for crab traps. So everybody will leave them alone because it's somebody else's crab trap. And apparently in the Gulf, if you steal somebody's crab trap, that's going to be bad. They ignored him. And I didn't know any better. They tie up the buoy. So then I go back. Now they put a salvage ship, and I get on the salvage ship. And my job is, when they recover the airplane, to account for all the classified boxes and also to recover the videotape from the pilot so we can see what he did and saw and said, and then take that back. We go back to the location. There's no buoy. It's gone. So they have to bring in another little sonar guy to re-find it. We now kind of know where it is, but they had to re-find it. And then they had a team of divers on the salvage ship, and they went down and hooked up the airplane and pulled it to the top and put it on the salvage ship. And when I was there, the divers are a lot like fighter pilots, the way they interact and everything. And so I told them, I just don't want to be bored. So I was actually lugging lines and air hoses or whatever they told me to do until they got the airplane up. And because up until that point, I was kind of as useless as a tit on a board. So once they did, I counted for all the boxes. We locked them away, and then they got the tape. We put the tape in a little cooler full of salt water because you don't want to leave it in the salt water until it can go. They bring me back to the shore with the airplane and the cooler with the tape. A staff car meets me. I haven't shaved for about 3 days, so they have me shave up real quick. They've already filed a flight plan. I take the cooler and we strap it in the back of an F-15. I fly from Tyndall to Andrews Air Force Base, where another staff car picks me up. I'm feeling really fucking important by now. Sorry for the French, but they drive me to the CIA headquarters near there that apparently have this like lab where they do tape reconstruction. So when they take me inside, I don't have any of these clearances. So all the screens go dark as I go down the hallway, kind of like, the unclean is here. They take me back to this little lab. We drop off the tape. They rinse it, do whatever. It didn't take them long, maybe an hour or two. They give me a clean copy of the tape on a brand new videotape, kick me out of the door. I go back to the F-15 and I fly back to present this to the accident investigation board so they can see what the guy did. But that one day of going from boat to car to plane to the CIA and all the way back was like, this is pretty neat. This is pretty cool. So not happy that we lost an airplane. Very, very happy that the guy was fine. Was very happy that we were able to recover what we did. The airplane was in amazingly good shape because it spun in flat. So if it had hit at a high rate of speed, there may have been nothing. But because of that, other than the gear hanging out and a couple panels broken off, it was never to be used again. But it was in amazingly good shape.
That's fascinating. What was the outcome then of the investigation? There
is a publicly releasable board. This has happened in like 1993, I think, something like that. But basically, it's from what I remember, he just was not aware that tank had not fed, and he didn't realize how close to the margin he was of going up high. He was focused on the mission and maybe a little bit too much worrying about the target and doing well in the ORI and all those pressures, and put himself in a situation that was not going to be recoverable. There was no way out of it. Once it happened, it was over. He really needed to, hindsight being 2020, not throwing any shade on him, to notice I have a full tank that's not feeding. I either need to knock it off and go home, or limit myself where I'm not going up high. The other guy can go up high. I'll stay down low and within, less than 30 degrees of AOA and all those parameters or whatever. But that didn't happen, and it caused a problem.
How do you know in an F-15 whether or not one tank is not feeding?
You're checking your gas. I will tell you that we, in between fights, as it were, when you're doing training, we do an ops check between each of them. So we're checking our fuel balances and all that, make sure everything looks about right. In these missions, it was a little different because there's no kind of like fights on and then a next engagement. So it's more a matter of your habit patterns and stuff. And this was something that we didn't do, very often, particularly at Tyndall where we're doing all the student sorties. So it's understandable that it slipped through.
So would you only
Sad,
be able,
but understandable.
You would only be able to know because, so you've got to select a switch that does external fuel and internal fuel. So you'd only be able to know by flipping it to internal fuel, seeing that number decrease while external fuel was showing a fixed number.
Yeah, you would actually take a look and see what's in your external tanks. And when you do that, the left one would read at or near zero. And in, I think in his case, it was the right one that was reading like 2,000 pounds, or at or near full.
Okay.
And then you go, ooh, that's not right. And then you adjust from there.
I didn't realize that there was a left and a right. I thought it was like a totalizer. So you had a total external and a total internal rather than.
There is a totalizer, but there's a little switch there you can turn to select and look at the external tanks, or look at the same thing will look at the wings as your left and right balance and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. All right. Okay. I wanted to ask about, sort of the final years of your career, and in particular an incident that happened to you flying out ashore. But before we do that, what were the highlights of your career flying the F-15? You talked, one of the things that you had also mentioned was, I think, Long Arrow. That was one of the things that you talked about over email with me. What things sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, now, with time and perspective, right, gray hair and old guy kind of thing. Really, it was the people that I worked with. Obviously, I think it was the biggest thing. It's such a high quality group. It was tremendously fun, going on the road with these guys, having difficult sorties, even the sorties that didn't go well. By the end of the day, you're drinking some beers, you've learned, you maybe have some scar tissue on you, but you had a really good time, and there's nothing else you'd rather to do. So the people aspect was absolutely the highlight. As far as the things, it was important, I thought, to participate in Noble Eagle. I was glad to do that. I was glad to help out in a way that, those units needed the help and wanted the help. So that was good. The time in Alaska was really pretty amazing with the technology and all that we got to do. And early in my career, as a wingman, I was on the Long Arrow competition team from Langley when I was in the A model in the 48th Fighter Squadron. And it was neat because we won. It was really, really cool because that squadron actually won 2 years in a row, which made the general officers in the Air Combat Command exceedingly upset. But that was a very good group, and that that experience was pretty neat. I will tell you that for a lot of it being a relatively new wingman in that, a lot of it was just hanging on and trying not to do anything stupid and do my job and see how we do. And so winning that as a team award was really, really pretty cool. It was, having done that, when I was at Tyndall, that's normally the host for the William Tell competition. The William Tell competition is much more dog and pony show, in my opinion. It's very good for Air Force publicity. I understand why they do it. But the Long Arrow, I thought, was a much better competition to foster combat capability across all the units, in this case, in the United States, because of the way they structured it. Instead of normally a squadron that's tasked with William Tell, you have a small group of folks that get a lot of sorties, a lot of training, and good experience, and everybody else suffers. Long Arrow does not allow you to do that. Not like they say you can't, but it's just the structure of it. You have no idea who's going to fly. If you have 3 flights in your squadron, each flight has to turn in a team that will be picked randomly, like 24 hours ahead of the competition. So you can't game it and say, we're going to give a flight all of our training and all the best airplanes and all the best maintenance. You don't know. You also, I don't know how they do the airplanes. I think the airplanes maintenance was allowed to prep whatever airplanes they wanted to push forward. But all the training for the guys continued across the board because you don't know. And they also you could only have 1 field grader. So you couldn't put a bunch of old guys with a lot of Eagles hours into your flight. You could only have 1 patch wearer. We had neither. I mean, we had a field grader, but we did not have a patch wearer in our flight, just the way we didn't have a patch wearer in our flight. And the wingmen had to be wingmen. They could not be a 4-ship flight lead mission commander flying as number 4. I'm sure that would be great for competition, but that's what they did. So yeah, that was a neat experience. You take off from your base, and in this case, it was a competition between the numbered air forces. 1st Air Force, that's what we represented, in the 48th, 9th Air Force, which is represented both by the 1st Fighter Wing and the 33rd, and also I think it's 12th Air Force, which was represented by Holloman. And I think at that point they still had jets at in Arizona at Luke. I think they also had a team. Everybody takes off. Everybody hits a tanker, but has to fly a route of it. Works out to be equal length. So just because you live nearby, you still fly the same length of time. You get to an airspace, in this case, in the Gulf of Mexico. You fight an unknown threat. You score your thing, you land, and then they figure out who won. In our case, these were kind of early times. It was us. We had a 4-ship versus 4 F-16s simulating MiG-29s or whatever they were doing at the time. And a couple of RF-4s that were simulating like Sukhoi low fast bombers, as it were. And you got a lot more points if you killed the bombers, because that's why you're there as an air-to-air guy, and additional points for killing the air-to-air protection that they had with them.
Is it still ongoing? That sounds amazing. I've never heard of it.
It was really, really cool. And the main thing that I thought was neat about it was that, as opposed to I had never been in a wing that sent a team to William Tell, but I observed the 1st Fighter Wing do it, and just talking to the guys in the bar and listening to what there was a lot of discontent because, the wing's trying to win. I understand that. But the cost of that was there was a big group of guys that weren't getting squat worth of sorties and training. And there was this small group that was getting, an overabundance of stuff. Good for the competition, bad if they ring the bell and you need to go to war, shortly after or shortly before William Tell. And Long Arrow was kind of structured to avoid that, which was a smart thing to do. I don't think they do them anymore. It basically stopped going into the Gulf War, and I don't think it ever recovered. Maybe it'll come back. I don't know. But I thought it was a really neat way to do a competition that built comradeship. It was still a competition, but it also was good for, everybody was trying their hardest. If all the 12 guys or whatever that were selected in the 3 flights to fly that thing, plus the spares, everybody's trying to sharpen their skills because you don't know, you might get called, and if you do, you want to do well.
Yeah, that was
a cool thing.
That sounds very interesting. It was I think Opie Denny again was talking about how just before Desert Storm, him and a bunch of guys were doing exactly that. They were hoovering up all the sorties to prepare for William Tell.
William Tell, yeah.
Yeah, and they deployed to Lakenheath, a 4-ship, and they were just flying, and then in August, and so he talks a little bit about that. That's very interesting. Yeah. What about WSEP? Did you ever shoot anything? Did you ever get a chance? Yeah.
So when I was at the 48th, I went down and shot an AIM-9P because they were trying to get rid of them. And the WSEP is structured so that the youngest guys in the airplane get the missiles first. And if there's extra missiles, it'll filter to the older guys who have probably already shot. So I got to shoot an AIM-9P and also an AIM-7. And they have the profile and all that. And that's an outstanding experience because, as you know from your discussions with guys in Desert Storm who may or may not have shot a missile before, if you've shot one and you know how it's supposed to look, how it's supposed to feel, all that kind of stuff, if it doesn't go right in combat, you'll identify that immediately. If you've never shot a missile and it's just always been training missiles where nothing comes off the airplane, there is no smoke, there's no vibration, there's no waggling of the wings or anything like that, you may or may not know because it's just like all your training sorties. And then once again, kind of being lucky rather than good, when I was an instructor at Tyndall, everybody's deployed because we're still doing all that Southern Watch, Northern Watch, all that stuff. So when WSEP had extra missiles, they would call us and say, we need to get the test shots done. Can you please send us some IPs to shoot missiles? Let me think real hard. Yes. So we shot a bunch of missiles, AIM-9Ls. I didn't get to shoot an AMRAAM, which I do wish I had had a chance to do it, but they were kind of new and they weren't shooting a lot of them. And a lot of times the guys that were shooting those were like 422, that test squadron and stuff. but I got to shoot a lot of AIM-9Ps. And in some regards, shooting the AIM-9P was the most fun because you really had to use your BFM skills to get into a relatively restricted weapons engagement zone, behind the drone and all that, versus, the Lima and the Mike can be shot at all aspects. Now, they'd give you specifics, but that one involved, you needed to do your BFM right or you could embarrass yourself. And that was a lot of fun. And then we also did, WSEP is normally the sponsor for William Tell, and they normally would task the wing to provide both the red air support, the 325th wing, the FTU, red air support, and also I hated this system. It was called AGATS. It was a towed system from an F-15 that they would shoot at, and it scores. And it's, so we would provide the agates for the guys to shoot at. Not fun. I was one of the agate tow pilot guys. I hated that, but we did it for them, and their profiles were kind of goofy, but we did that for them.
What was the length of the cable? So agates is like a dart, isn't it? It's
not long enough. No, I forget exactly. I forget if it was, I think, and this is my memory on this is very fuzzy, maybe about 1,000 feet, 500 feet. It was no closer than 500, but, and they were not supposed to shoot at the agate. If they did that, they would break it and kill it and not get scored. They shot at this little cone thing behind it, which was really more, it wasn't actually like a rag or anything they could look at. I did not like the agate system at all. I love shooting the gun. Shooting the gun is tremendously fun, but the agate system was, the thing that we liked the most is if the agate malfunctioned and there was a switch where we could cut it and drop it into the water. That was satisfying.
Because I think it was, I'm really testing my memory here, but I think it was acoustic, wasn't it? So it was listening for the rounds passing nearby.
The Mach, the supersonic blast from each of the bullets going by. Yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, so you talked about, so Long Arrow was going, and you would engage in an unidentified or an unknown threat. It makes me wonder, in your very early days in the Eagle, did you get a chance to fly against constant peg? Did you get to go to fly against the MiGs? Guys
from my squadron had gone, but it was so classified at the time that I flew a ton of sorties with one of the guys I really respected. He ended up going to weapons school later on. And he had done constant peg and never, ever talked about it.
Really?
So they weren't even allowed in the squadron, in the vault, to tell you about it. It was just, you either went and you knew about it, or you didn't go and you didn't know about it. So it existed at the time. I did not. I think it was winding down by that point. So I don't know how active it was. He had gone a couple years prior to my arrival. But yeah, so it existed, but I did not get to do it. When I found about it later, I was like, man, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And then, truthfully, I found out about it when I was at an RTU IP, because there was a guy that we thought the hell of, but he had gone to constant peg, I think, as part of the weapons school thing. And that either in part or totally was a reason that he didn't make it through weapons school. I don't know all the details, but there was a constant peg element to his experience. And we were like, man, that because we really thought he was one of the better instructors that we had seen, really able to connect with the students and describe things very, very effectively.
Wow. Okay. A couple more questions before we get into the story that we haven't teased about or that we haven't mentioned about, but just in sort of closing then. So you said that you got out in 2007. What was your last flight in the Eagle like? How was that?
Exceedingly emotional for me, because I really loved what I was doing. And if the Air Force had offered for me to continue to do it, I would have. But by that point, I saw the writing on the wall that, it was time to pull the handles, go over the side, so to speak, and do something different. I have to give just tremendous thanks to the 58th Fighter Squadron that hosted my fini flight, because I didn't have a wing, I didn't have a squadron. And then I told them, and they said, no, we want to do this for you. And so the really, really cool thing, and if I get a little emotional, I apologize, but my my father-in-law was a Marine in World War II on Iwo Jima and Guam. Tremendous guy. And I absolutely, loved him to death. And he had, every time we moved in the military, him and his wife moved with us. He drove my pregnant wife from Alabama to Colorado in his RV. And she was like 8.5 months pregnant. I mean, just a good dude, right? So he came down. He wouldn't have missed my Fini flight for the world. And he came down for that. And the 58th hosted him. And they brought all the pilots in from the wing to their bar and had him come up to the front and talk to them about his experience in World War II. He had never said most of what he said that day to anybody in the family, but he felt so at home and he felt so respected that he just opened up, and he had their attention for like 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And he was in his late 80s at this point. And that was just ultimately cool. So yeah, when you're starting the airplane and it's the last time, that's kind of a weird feeling. Then every little piece that's the last is definitely and the weather wasn't that good, whatever, it just didn't matter. We got up, we did some fighting, and then we came back, and then they did all the normal, champagne and the family and pictures and all that stuff. But yeah, they were tremendous. Both because we kind of made a family vacation out of it. We got a condo on the beach and brought everybody in and had a nice time. But the 58th really, really did a nice job. And the respect that they showed to Mr. Pugh that they had never met was just outstanding.
What did you do then?
I got through without crying. I'm pretty happy.
You did. I was thinking, don't make me cry.
Yeah.
I was thinking this could be emotional. What did you do then for your Fini? Did you do some BFM? What did you do?
No, we did I think that day it was a 2v2. We did one, and of course we changed up the rules a little bit. So we did. There was and I also wanted to do a sortie that had some training value to the wingman that I was with, and it wasn't like a guy. It was just a regular wingman. So we did kind of one pass where we was the scenario and all that. And then we kind of went, okay, this is guns and heaters only, and had a little bit more of the BFM fun and stuff like that. So it was nice. It was cool.
Do you think? I mean, it's been described to me many times that that there are pilots who fly fighters, and then there are fighter pilots, who don't necessarily fight fighters. That being a fighter pilot
right.
is a mentality, is an attitude, is a as a spiritual thing, is many different things. It's not really defined by you go and get into a particular airplane and fly it. How do you
right.
feel sort of looking back now? I mean, 2007, so we're approaching 20 years, 18 years since you last flew the F-15. Mm-hmm. Do you still feel like an Eagle pilot? Do you still feel like a fighter pilot?
Yeah, it's definitely part of my DNA, part of my identity. I would say probably more than it should be. Maybe I didn't go on and do other things. But no, definitely. It was a life-changing experience for the better, for the good. And I'm definitely, glad, very, very happy that I had the opportunity to do it. I will tell you that I never viewed myself as one of the guys that was nearly as natural as my competitors or compatriots. There were a lot of guys out there that I thought were much more natural Eagle drivers than I was. I just tried to work at it really, really hard. And hopefully, got to a level where I was able to contribute in a significant and meaningful way to the organizations that I was involved in, and lean on the skills, experience, and the patience of the guys that are around me. And I think that happened, but you have to ask them, I guess.
I imagine that you're being sort of modest in some respects too, because I think that there are some sort of essential innate skills that fighter pilots have that us mere mortals don't. I mean, there must be, there are things.
Yeah, I was in the right crowd, but I would say there was definitely guys in that crowd that I viewed as, much more, picked it up much more naturally, where I felt that I had to, not that they didn't work hard, but I felt that their natural ability to pick this up was probably better than mine. Doesn't mean you can't be successful. It just means you have to work harder.
Yeah.
And that was really came to fruition, at that RTU assignment where I really put my nose to the grindstone and just studied, work to develop my teaching ability for the RTU, and it paid off.
Shamu, let's close out, if we may, with a discussion of you riding with the 20th Fighter Wing at Shaw.
So I'm part of the AFCENT 9th Air Force. I'm based out of Shaw. There are no F-15s at Shaw. I do all my flying for the Eagle TDY, a little bit at Langley, but they were transitioning, as I previously discussed, primarily at Eglin, and also with some of the guard units around. And the wing is going to get an inspection, the 20th Fighter Wing, which are F-16 CJs, Block 50. They have 3 squadrons there, or they had 3 squadrons. And their wing commander knew that I'd be part of the inspection team. In fact, because I'm of a different MDS, Mission Design Series, since I'm an Eagle guy, there's a good chance that I will be in charge of the inspection at the lieutenant colonel level, because the other guys in the office were F-16 pilots that flew with that wing. So at least to give the appearance of objectivity, they're not going to let them grade the same guys that kind of control their day-to-day flying fate. Makes sense. So he wanted to cozy up to me, I think, as best as he could, and very wisely, just without even me asking, wrote a letter that said, "Hey, Shamu, you're going to be given this inspection. I'd like you to become familiar with our procedures and how we do things. You can fly in the back seat of any F-16 at any time that it's available without specific approval. Go forth, learn about us. We would like to show you what we're at." Classy move, smart move. And I was like, cool. There was one little hiccup to this. I had flown the T-38, which was two engine airplane. My wife was very, very supportive. Then I went to the Eagle 2-engine airplane, and she was really, really opposed to me flying single engine. Good news was I really didn't want to fly the Viper as a job. I wanted to fly the Eagle, but here was a very unique opportunity. So we actually staged our family down to Shaw. I was there alone for about a year because I had a daughter who was a senior in high school. We didn't want to upset that apple cart, getting ready for college and all that. So she was up in Langley. I also knew I was giving an inspection to Langley as soon as I arrived at Shaw. I was going to spend 6 months at Langley. Why move them when I'm going to be there anyways? So I call her on a Friday and I go, "Hey, Monday morning, there's an F-16 backseat sortie. It's with a guy in the office. He's really good. I know we don't fly single engine, but how about a one-time kitchen pass, right?" So she goes, "Okay, yeah." And I said, "They're the best F-16s in the fleet. They're, new block, 50s, good motors, all that stuff. We don't talk that weekend because she's busy with kids. I'm busy screwing off, whatever." I go in Monday morning, fly, and it's a 2-hop thing. The guy that I'm flying in the back seat with is giving a check ride to a weapons school guy in one of the squadrons. The first sortie is his check ride, like an instrument check, going out, just following him around, doing all that. Then we're going to come back, hot pit refuel, take off again, go off the coast and fight BFM, basically for fun, right, and training value. First sortie, uneventful. We get to the hot pits, uneventful for the most part. We take off again, and we're just going feet wet off the coast of South Carolina. If we look to the left, Myrtle Beach is about equidistant to this side as Charleston is to the right. So we're right in the middle between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. For those that are familiar, there's some warning areas off the coast. That's where we're going to fly BFM when the engine absolutely comes apart. I had, especially because of my A model time, lots of experience with compressor stalls. The A model was prone to compressor stalls at certain AOAs or throttle movements or whatever. And, we could dial one back, recover. And if not, we could turn that engine off, come home on the second engine, no big deal. This was a lot more impressive of a compressor stall than I had experienced before. And I had a little bit of fun with this when I had to talk to the Accident Investigation Board, which was led by a guy that I was very good friends with from previous assignments. So as what I told them was, At the time, it was the largest compressor stall I'd ever seen, and that could have been for three reasons. Number one, maybe it was, no kidding, the biggest compressor stall. Number two, where you sit in the F-16, you are much closer to the engine than you are in the Eagle, so maybe that was why it really got my attention. Or number three, I knew I was in a single engine airplane, and therefore I was really, really screwed. And so the board at that time started laughing, and he turned off the tape, and he, used my kind of goes, Shamu, you can't do that. Not an official testimony. we need to keep this serious. I said, well, that was my moment to be a comedian. So anyways, the engine was gone. We did not know why. We had no idea why. He tried to restart it from the front a bunch of times, could not get it to go. He had me try from the back just in case there was something weird there, either moving the throttle, I forget exactly what it was. He made the decision to go towards Myrtle Beach, no longer had any military presence. He made the correct decision, to try to get to Charleston to see if we could get the airplane on the ground, dead stick land, if we're lucky. Turns out, no, that you use up so much energy. We're about 22,000 feet. You use up so much energy in a 90-degree-ish turn that there's no way. And we saw early on, as we were pointed to Charleston, that the math wasn't adding up. The other thing that didn't help, he tried to punch off the centerline tank. We had a centerline tank. It didn't come off. I tried to punch it off from the back. It didn't come off. It never came off, for reasons I can get into later. And then as we got close to Charleston, we decided, hey, we're not going to get there. We need to get out of this thing. So he tried to fly it basically up what's called the Ashley River. The couple funny parts, we're getting down to our controlled ejection altitude, and we're flying by the Citadel, which is a military college in Charleston. There's a whole bunch of cadets in their yard looking at this completely quiet, unbelievably silent F-16, and they're waving at us. So I waved back. He was a little bit busy up front, but I waved back. Then we punch out. The way that the sequence goes is the back seat goes first, because if the front seat went first, it would, fry you. When we pulled the handles, it did not work as advertised. What's supposed to happen is the canopy is supposed to explosively leave. It pulls a lanyard, which then sequences my seat in the back, his seat then a couple, seconds later, a small amount of time later in the front, and we both leave. The canopy did not leave the airplane. It just kind of went clunk and back about 2 or 3 inches. That was probably the time I was the most worried, because if that doesn't go, we don't go. If we don't go, we're done. Fortunately, the natural wind flow went underneath it and peeled off the canopy like a tuna can lid, and then it went out. So we got out a little bit lower than what we had planned on. Hindsight being 20/20, if I had to do it again, I wouldn't go that close to a minimum recommended controlled ejection altitude. I'd pad it a little bit more, but a lot of decisions ongoing at that point. And so then I went out, he went out, and we had what I would call the most perfect. He was a major, I was a lieutenant colonel, field grade landing zone. We landed on dry straw over wet, soft mud. And it's really funny what you think about. I don't really remember specifically leaving the airplane. I may have blacked out there just for a moment. I don't know. But I woke up, and the chute had opened, did our little procedural thing. And you think stupid things. The only thing I could think of is, man, I really don't want to land in the river and get all wet. The least important aspect of any of this. There is a mushroom cloud less than 1/10 of a mile away from me that is where the airplane impacted and blew up, which I think is in the pictures that I sent you. But for whatever silly reason, that's what I thought of. So I land, he lands, he's fine, I'm fine for the most part, a little bit shorter than when I took off that morning. But that was for the ejection seat. And there's a picture of me walking through the mud with my head kind of down, the parachute's dragging. I'm walking over to where the other guy is. And my wife goes, I know what you're thinking. I went, what? She goes, you're thinking, I have to call Betsy. until on my, well, actually second, but on the first day of me flying in a single engine airplane, I've now had to punch out of one. And she was right. So the Coast Guard has a base right there at Charleston. They picked us up off of the mud flat within about 5 minutes, which was pretty cool. They had us at a dock nearby within probably 10 minutes of us landing on the ground. What amazed me, and I actually ended up writing an article about some post-ejection, ideas and considerations for the safety magazine for the Air Force. When we got to the dock, there was a fire chief there, which was nice. And I said, hey, do you have a cell phone? He goes, yep. And I said, can I borrow that real quick? He goes, sure, no problem. So I called Betsy and I said, hey, you may hear from the Air Force. You may see this on the news, but I just want you to know that I'm okay. And I'm trying to ease her into this. She goes, where are you? I said, I'm in Charleston. She goes, you weren't supposed to land in Charleston. Well, sweetie, we didn't exactly land in Charleston. And then she kind of put it together. And that phone call was useful because the wing commander, and I like teasing along this lines just because the Thunderbirds aren't my favorite part of the Air Force. I like the tactical Air Force. The wing commander was TDY. The vice wing commander was a former Thunderbird. So he ends up getting this, pile of stuff dumped on his lap of you've just lost an F-16. There are two guys we're trying to find, all that stuff. And he's at the command post and he gives, my wife was at a different house and he called our house and left the following message of, hey, this is Vice Wing Commander so-and-so. Your husband is punched out of an airplane. We are confident he's okay. If you have any questions, call me. No phone number, no nothing. And so I laugh at that just because he was a little flustered, and which is understandable. But fortunately, I'd already gotten through to her, so that message was not important. And then the things that we kind of developed after that is Charleston's a heavy base. People don't jump out of heavies. They either land properly or they die, right? So their flight surgeons, everybody really had no idea what to do with us. So we're like, hey guys, I think you need to take our blood. We need to do some urine samples. There's things that the board is going to want that. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. So that all developed. But the only last funny part of it was the guy that I flew with, Angus is his call sign. I won't use his real name. Really good guy and really good pilot and fun to do everything with. But he and I ended up being taken back to Shaw, which is about a 2-hour drive from Charleston, in an ambulance in the back, just sitting there with nothing to do. And I could tell he was really raking himself over the coals, which is understandable. It was his airplane. He's going, what did I do wrong? How come the engine wouldn't start? Did I miss something? And so I'm trying to distract him. So the lady had our vital signs from when they took him, and my blood pressure was relatively low, my pulse was down, and his was off the charts. So I just start needling him to try to get his mind off of it, going, hey, Angus, I'm really worried about you, dude. I think you need to go to the gym more, which is really funny because I'm this old, fat lieutenant colonel, it's about to retire, and he's younger and in better shape. But I'm like, yeah, those numbers, we need to get you to work out more. And he's like, just stop bothering me. I didn't realize I'm trying to distract him. But we get back. The really nice thing was the guy who ran the board that I knew from my Eagle time, early on, I don't even know if he's supposed to or not, but he was very wise in doing this. He told Angus and myself, come to see me at this place. He took us down to the where the maintenance guys, they had pulled the engine out of the mud, and he showed him that the turbine was gone. A turbine, I actually have one. The turbine blade had broken loose, and within a fraction of a second had removed all the other turbine blades. And that's why the engine stalled. That's why it could not be restarted. And when he did that, you could see the weight of the world go off of Angus's shoulders and his face of, there was nothing I could have done or didn't do correctly. This thing was never. So what unfolded was the engine shop was at Shaw, active duty guys. When they put the turbines together, I think there's 72 blades, if I remember correctly. There's this little tiny spacer that goes in between each one. It looks a lot like a very old style razor blade. And its function is that when it gets heated up, it fills the gap between each of the blades. So all that hot gas doesn't go in there and corrode and destroy the base of the turbine blades so that they fall out. The guy who put the engine together didn't put in a single one. It's kind of a known thing. If you miss one, you cannot tune the engine up just like, a bike tire because it's out of balance. And you'll notice it go, there's a blade missing, or there's that piece missing, put it in, and then you can tune it up. If you don't put any in, it's symmetric, circularly, wise, you can tune it up. It'll run fine for a while. It's a known thing after what's called 500 engine cycles. It's a crapshoot. We were on 550 some odd engine cycles and the engine blew up.
Wow.
So that's probably a long story, but not every. The backstory to that is I heard from everybody of people I hadn't talked to for 15, 20 years, mainly Eagle guys sending me emails that sounded something like, what part of single engine did you not understand? How many S's are in stupid, and then all this kind of stuff. So and it was all in good fun, and it was nice hearing from everybody. And obviously everybody was happy that we were okay. But yeah, that was kind of an interesting way towards the very end of my career to do something very different, especially for an Eagle guy. There's quite a few Viper guys, just nature of the business, that have gotten out of airplanes and continued, but not too many Eagle guys have had to do that.
What was the root cause then of the canopy not coming off and of the central fuel tank?
Excellent question. Okay, in fact, the canopy and the tank not leaving are kind of similarly related in that there are things called carts. They're explosive devices that will blow things off of airplanes when you need it to happen. In the canopy for the D model is bigger and heavier. So it has this pole in the middle that helps it go up and down. And I forget if it's the top or the bottom, but at one end of that is a cart that when the ejection sequence is initiated, that thing is supposed to blow up in order to help the whole canopy leave. And that cart did not fire correctly or at all. And so that's why it kind of went back and was unlocked, but it didn't leave like it was supposed to because that little piece failed. And then the pressure of the wind broke the pole or whatever, and off it went. The cart was interesting in that in the Eagle, we have carts that are about, I think, like 6 or 7 inches tall. They're big. And we also have sometimes these little tiny carts that are about 2 or 3 inches tall. The F-16 only has the little ones. And what they kind of learned from my understanding is that those little ones, when they're cold soaked, like up at altitude for quite a while, they don't necessarily make the right amount. So it fired, but it didn't make the requisite amount of gas pressure to move the hooks to get rid of the tank. The Eagle, that hasn't been a problem because the carts are so much bigger that even when they're cold soaked, they seem to have enough oomph to make the requisite amount of gas pressure to move what they need to move and get things off the airplane.
Wow. You've retold the story with great humor, and I don't want to be a buzzkill or anything, but I did want to ask you a couple of serious questions about the sort of the psychological and the emotional aspect. So the first was, as you recalled, the engine sort of shat itself at 26,000 feet, whatever it was, medium altitude. So you've got some time to think about what's coming.
We did.
What was that process like for you? And I guess especially for you in the back seat, because although you can help with the engine relight and trying to punch off the tank, you're in the back seat.
So and that's an excellent question. He was full-fledged mode of handling an F-16 emergency. I kind of, and it wasn't by design, I think it was just by habit. I went into my T-38 F-15 IP role, not because he needed instruction. He absolutely didn't, but just tried to be a calming influence of like, hey, Angus, decision go to Charleston. That's a good idea. I think that's a good call. And just try to be a calming influence of, not like, hey, I don't think we're going to make it to Charleston, but from what I'm seeing, I don't think we're going to get there. What are you seeing? Just kind of, and I don't know if I was successful or not. Angus did great. He obviously could have done it without, having 200 some odd pounds of useless meat behind him. But I tried to take that role of just a calming influence. And as he made decisions, confirming, yep, that makes sense to me. Yep, I think we're going to have to punch out of this as well. Then ejection altitude is such and such. Let's plan on getting out about then or whatever. And that's the role that I took.
And I wanted to ask as well then, and this will be I think this will be my final question, unless your answer prompts more. I'm infamous for saying it's my final question, and it's not, but I think it will be. But you'd said that when the canopy came off and it just moved a couple of inches, you had enough time to reflect on the possibility if it didn't come off, you were in trouble. That's
probably the extent of my thought process was, oh, we might be in trouble and this could be bad. And then it left and then we were gone. But it did get my attention.
Does it come back to you, that event? Is it something that you see in your dreams ever?
Yeah, no. Betsy teases me because I do fly in my sleep sometimes if I have, especially if I watch some eagle videos or whatever that night, I'll be moving around and she'll go, thanks a lot. You're flying in your sleep again last night. But no, I did not find the event traumatic. I was very impressed, not with me or Angus or whatever, but just, they tell you when you're going through all this stuff that the training will pay off. You'll do what you're trained, and if you do it, it should work out. That is exactly what happened. So once we hit the mud and we were fine, there was no big emotional rush or, oh man, we just cheated death or anything like that. It was just, hey, we were trained to do this. We got out. We did the right things under the parachute, and we landed safely. That's what they said would happen. Damn, it works. And so it was more along those lines of kind of after, 25 some odd years almost of flying airplanes in the Air Force that, it wasn't a big lie. It actually really, no kidding, works. And you do believe that because you know about others, but as a personal experience, you're like, okay, that was pretty cool. Everything worked pretty much as advertised, with those exceptions, but those work themselves out.
Do you think that sort of part of what makes somebody a fighter pilot and or suited to flying fighters is the ability to not ruminate on certain things? And I'll give you, for example. So I
sure.
So you talk about training, and I get that. So your reaction, you build muscle memory. Your reactions to certain situations becomes effectively instinctive because it's ingrained in you, and you do things and it works out well. I remember. I mean, I've been very fortunate to have flown lots of times in the back of Eagles and F-16s and F-18s and so on. And one of the memories that stands out in my mind was being given training on canopy malfunctions for the ACES 2 seat, and it's there's an overlap or a torn panel or an inversion or whatever, and this is what you do when you get this is what you do. And then one of the slides I was given was, I can't remember what it was. It was like, if none of this stuff works, then you've got the rest of your life to think about what to do next.
Yeah, dark fighter pilot humor. Yeah,
and I thought, that's not what I want to hear. I don't want to hear that. So do you think that, as sort of one of the attributes that makes people suited to flying fighters is the ability to put that kind of scenario behind them? I mean, I wonder whether or not, if I were in your situation, I would then start thinking, well, I hope the fucking canopy works. I don't want to be the guy that has, is that something that you have to do? You have to not think about the things that could be?
I think that part of it is a willingness to compartmentalize and categorize risks and kind of come to an acceptance on that those are okay. Because obviously, there's mid-airs that can be really bad. There's hitting the ground. That's, so the ability to take those various risks and accept that they're there and have kind of a decision making within your brain that is, what can I do, knowing I can't completely eliminate it, but what can I do to mitigate as much of it as possible? And that's what I'm going to do. I do think that is a part of the ethos or the fighter pilot way of thinking. I would agree with that. And I think also, it's kind of funny that you said this, but I think there's a little bit of kind of like athletes will talk about having goldfish memory. Is that familiar to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you had a bad play or you make a mistake during a game, of being able to be a goldfish and not even remember it, just kind of move on to the next play. And that is a part of it. But to me, that part is more actually evident if you like have a bad sortie, particularly when you're going through a formal training or something, that you're able to just kind of put that aside and then focus on the next one. I think that's an element that helps as well.
This is Shamu. This is my last question. And so just tell us, what did you do then in your life post 2007 to replace flying the F-15? I mean, can you replace it? What have you done since then?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did, obviously, go find a job, right? So I started working both for AFCENT in a civilian contractor capacity, in a job that I really didn't like, but it paid the bills, and my family was where they needed to be, and they had sacrificed for 25 years, so it was time for me to pony up and sacrifice and do something that maybe I don't like that much, but it pays the bills, and the kids could stay in their schools and do all that good stuff. And then I moved over out of AFCENT to a job that really surprising, almost over 25 years prior to that, I graduated with an engineering degree from the academy. And the people that hired me in the Army at US ARCENT could give really two hoots the fact that I had flown fighters, Air Force, or anything, but they were really impressed that I had an engineering degree that I had done absolutely nothing with. But I went to the Army to do kind of math and logic problems and shit like that for them. And that was a lot more fun. That was, a little bit more challenging and academically or intellectually stimulating. So I had a good experience with that. And the other nice thing was that being one of maybe 3 Air Force guys in a headquarters full of Army people, I was able to inject some Air Force, either knowledge or stuff. One thing I did is the group that I worked with, again, in a plans capacity, it was now G5 instead of J5, like at NORAD. I set up a tour of the base. I set it up like a mission briefing. So we went in, I gave everybody lineup cards. They had to sit on the bus in the order of the lineup card. One bus went here, one bus went there. They got a tour of the RAPCON, the radar facility, the tower, an F-16 with all the weapons laid out and an explanation from the weapons guys on what they all did. Then a briefing from some of the pilots, and they went to the simulator and they got to cycle through and fly a little bit of the F-16 simulator. So doing that kind of stuff was fun and rewarding, and kind of leveraging my prior experience to their advantage. Because in truth, most Army guys don't know squat about, aviation. Mainly the nuts and bolts and how it all kind of goes together. They understand the big picture concept of what we bring to the fight, but the nuts and bolts, I thought they found it pretty interesting. They seemed to have a very good time. In fact, one of my very, very good friends, out of all of my military experiences, both in the Air Force and working with the Army, is a now retired colonel who's a civilian contractor in Europe. And I did something kind of cool for him. We had lots and lots of turnover, not because of him, but because contracts in the Army are run really strangely. They never work right. So we had constant people getting fed up and leaving. And I was one of the few that kind of stayed put. So when he had his going away party, I gave him a call sign. And I gave him the call, his last name starts with an M. So I gave him the call sign Mauler, M-A-U-L-E-R, like, getting mauled, and with his last name starting with an M, so it kind of rhymed. And I gave him a poster that had a Russian airplane on each of it, and under each one it had the name of a contractor who had left, and then a little kill symbol on it. And I told him that he was a contractor, ace times 3, because he had mauled us for all his years that there, and he understood it was completely in fun and in jest. And to this day, if I call him anything other than Mauler, he would be insulted.
That's awesome. Okay, Shamu, thank you so much for your time.
I really appreciate your time.
No, I mean the pleasure is ours. It's mine. It's the listeners. I think it's a very rare thing to talk to somebody who has flown from really the very early models through to the later models, and in this case,
right.
The A model Eagle as a phys guy, as a fighter interceptor guy, interceptor squadron guy, all the way through then to one of, I think in my book, with Disco Dilly, we called them the Golden Eagles, the eagles that had the AESA radar and the fiddle. So the ones they're flying now, they're retiring now, finally, to the boneyard, are not really that different from what you were flying, in 2007.
No.
So,
and I will tell you that there's one model Eagle out there that was very unique, that was the most fun I ever flew. And that was a MISSIP A model with the Florida Air National Guard. So it had the A model, which has less gas, but a lighter nose. It had the big engines that, they put in later ones. So it had a ton of thrust, a light nose, and all the other fancy toys. That was the sports car of Eagles. They're all great to fly, but flying those MISSIP A models with the big engines in them, that was very cool. That was a BFM machine. You could hurt yourself flying those things. Yeah.
Thanks, Shamu. Appreciate your time.
All right. Take care.